When it comes to marijuana as a gym goer, should you puff puff pass or puff puff and keep on puffing because it's going to help me set a new personal best? That's the question so many are thinking about. Does smoking weed help improve performance? With the acceptance of marijuana growing every day, both legally and socially, it's only inevitable that someone will wonder if it can. At the same time, we also know a bunch of people are doing it anyway, perhaps falsely believing it's not going to hurt them. Or maybe they're right. Maybe marijuana is going to help. It's been shown to be an effective aid for other issues, so why not your bicep growth? We're going to find out. A lot has changed in the past decade with marijuana and society's stance on it. With rapid legalization around the world, including inside the US, laws are changing at a blistering pace. Therefore, while these stats may not be correct for long, currently marijuana is legal in 38 states for medicinal use and is legal for recreational use in 24 states. This means that anyone of age can go buy some bread, milk, and a bag of weed anytime they want in almost half of the states in the USA. This legalization is largely in part to the fact that we know a lot more about the plant than we once did. It's now accepted that marijuana has numerous legitimate health benefits for those who partake. This is evident as it first became accepted in the medical field, largely to reduce pain. However, it's also been found to reduce eye pressure, which has made it a common treatment for those with glaucoma. Other possible medical uses include reducing nausea in chemo patients, improving loss of appetite, relaxing those with epilepsy or spastic muscles, and it can treat various neurological and mental disorders such as PTSD and Parkinson's. As of late, the sale of CBD for therapeutic purposes has grown extensively. With this increase in use, it was only a matter of time before someone decided to see what happened if they hit the bong before hitting the gym. Before we go further, let's define some terminology for different substances to help you keep things straight. The first is marijuana. Marijuana is the common term for the actual cannabis plant, a plant with psychoactive properties when ingested, usually through inhalation. These plants have hundreds of different compounds, known as cannabinoids, which are responsible for getting you high. Related to marijuana is hemp. Hemp is basically marijuana that has THC levels less than 0.3%. It's basically marijuana that doesn't get you high, but this also brings us to the next term, THC. THC stands for tetrahydrocannabinol, and it's one of the 100 different compounds known as cannabinoids which are found in marijuana. It's the main psychoactive compound in marijuana that makes you high. This high occurs when it interacts with the cannabinoid receptors in the brain and the central nervous system. Another word you'll hear a lot is CBD. CBD stands for cannabidiol. It's another cannabinoid found in marijuana. Unlike THC, it does not have psychoactive elements, so it doesn't get you high. It's commonly sold in its isolated form for people who want the calming effect without the high. Even though it's just now marijuana's been regaining legality, interest in it for possible performance enhancement occurred quite a long time ago. In fact, it'll probably be a surprise to you to find out just how long researchers have actually been studying the effects of marijuana and performance. One of the oldest studies on the green stuff comes all the way back from 1975. Unfortunately, it didn't necessarily help to start building the foundation for pro-marijuana use in the world of sports. In it, the researchers tested the effects of smoking on both hand grip strength and a submaximal bicycle ergometer test to measure work capacity. While there was no effect on grip strength, there was a drop in work capacity. This will become a common trend. Some things aren't affected and some are. Regardless, the only positive from this study is that it didn't cause a drop in grip strength. That's probably not going to make a big hit as a sports supplement. This makes sense though. It seems pretty obvious that inhaling smoke can't be good for performing exercise for extended periods. Since that time, researchers have identified more than one mechanism for an adverse effect. This can affect your cardiorespiratory, pulmonary, or even skeletal muscle systems. Upon smoking, there's an immediate decrease in airway conductance after inhalation. This will increase airway resistance, making it harder to breathe. This generally peaks 15 minutes after use and may persist up to 60 minutes after inhalation. What's interesting is that marijuana will increase resistance even if it's not inhaled. When consumed orally, a decrease in conductance will take longer to peak at 3 hours, but it may last up to 6 hours. At the same time, marijuana can increase heart rate by 30 to 50% after smoking. Not only does this increased heart rate prevent high-intensity training, it's also one of the mechanisms behind reports of feeling anxious or panic. Apart from the physiological effects, increased anxiety and panic on their own can cause a decline in performance. In terms of your skeletal muscles, THC again has a negative effect, as it may decrease mitochondrial activity by 12 to 15%. While these numbers do come from studies on mice, it has seen some major implications for us. You see, your mitochondria is where the adenosine triphosphate is produced. Adenosine triphosphate, also known as ATP, is your body's energy currency, and it's required to power every muscle contraction. When energy is needed, a phosphate group breaks off of ATP, which then releases energy to trigger muscle activity. This means that the amount of work you perform is dependent on the amount of ATP you have. If marijuana decreases your body's ability to produce ATP by 12 to 15%, this will shorten your ability to work by 12 to 15%. Another concern that athletes should have with smoking marijuana are the possible negative effects on the endocrine system, the system that controls your hormones. Testosterone is the male's primary sex hormone and strongest anabolic hormone. It also has a confusing relationship with marijuana smoking, as studies show contradicting outcomes. This includes having a negative impact, no impact, or even a few with positive impacts. For example, one surprising study showed that 21 days of intense use had no impact on the smoker's testosterone levels. The same researchers then conducted a similar study but measured luteinizing hormone levels. Your luteinizing hormone is responsible for signaling Leydig cells in your testes, which triggers the production of testosterone. Again, the intense use of marijuana showed no negative effect. Now let's look at the counterpart of testosterone, cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone and it's catabolic in nature. Contrary to testosterone, its presence promotes the breakdown of muscle fibers, not good for athletes. Another difference compared to testosterone, it seems as though marijuana causes an increase in cortisol when used at the levels of normal use. It doesn't need intense smoking for these negative results to occur. In fact, there even seems to be a dose response. Dose response simply means that the more marijuana you use, the greater the rise in cortisol levels. This generally suggests there is a direct mechanism which creates the relationship. Regardless, so far you have higher cortisol levels and possibly lower testosterone levels. In terms of growth hormone, marijuana use tends to also have a negative effect. This is likely due to marijuana stimulating somatostatin release, which inhibits the secretion of growth hormone. However, this tends to be an acute response rather than a permanent change from chronic use. All that's to say that, in general, smoking marijuana tends to have a negative effect on the endocrine system, especially when it comes to optimizing muscle growth. It likely lowers your anabolic hormones and increases your catabolic hormones. We should also note that this observation comes from relatively few studies, therefore we can't make any conclusive statements. In addition, while these numbers do show the endocrine system is affected, we don't know if it'll have any noticeable effects on training. Will you lose your gains if you smoke just one time? Or can you smoke as much as you want as long as it's after your workout? We don't know, but as of now, we know that marijuana will more than likely have no effect or a negative effect on your hormones. Now that we have a better understanding of some of the physiological responses to marijuana, let's go ahead and look at some actual performance studies to see what happens in the real world. Let's start with another study from way back, 1974 to be exact. This study looked at the effect marijuana had on participants with exertional angina. Exertional angina is a type of coronary artery disease which causes chest pain when the person is exerting themselves due to the heart not receiving enough blood. The study used 10 patients to compare the effects that a marijuana cigarette or a placebo had on their exercise time until reaching angina and needing to quit. While the placebo decreased exercise time until angina by 8.6%, the marijuana cigarette decreased exercise time by 48%. This means that the patients could only exercise for half of the time before they needed to quit due to angina. Remember when we mentioned the first study from 1975 that saw a decrease during submaximal cycling? Well, we found two more. These studies showed a decrease in performance when completing a Wingate test. The Wingate test uses a short burst of high-intensity cycling for 30 seconds on a cycle ergometer. It measures and compares the individual's ability to achieve and maintain anaerobic power. This measures anaerobic capacity, anaerobic fatigue, and peak anaerobic power. What's surprising is that in one of the studies, the experiment simply used marijuana users versus non-users. This means that they merely confessed to the frequent use of marijuana, anywhere from daily to 4 times a month. To be clear, they did not necessarily partake in smoking before the test. In fact, 3 of the 10 users didn't even test positive for having metabolites, such as THC, in their system. This suggests that the chronic smoking of marijuana can have a negative impact on your anaerobic performance even if you haven't smoked recently. This is an important consideration, as an athlete cannot simply say they will only smoke after training or playing as some negative effects aren't time-dependent. However, while their anaerobic performance dropped, there was no negative effect on aerobic performance, pulmonary function, or muscular strength. Why could this be? One theory behind this, at least for the no effect on aerobic and pulmonary function, is that inhaling marijuana may affect the body differently compared to administering using another method. For example, edibles consist of eating marijuana rather than inhalation. Dabbing is a way to take marijuana by inhaling the vapor of an oil and is believed to be less damaging than breathing in the smoke. Compared to other studies that only used inhalation, this study did in fact have participants that used these alternative forms of administering. This seems to support the theory that there is in fact a difference in the body's response to marijuana dependent by method of use. But again, there needs to be more studies to make a conclusive statement. However, even though this study didn't find a negative effect on pulmonary functions, it doesn't mean other studies don't find one. One of the first studies from the 1970s recorded the negative effect that smoking marijuana had on the cardiorespiratory and pulmonary system. So did this more recent study in 2007. Well, kind of. Researchers found that smoking one joint has about the same effect as smoking 5 cigarettes. This isn't totally surprising, as smoking one joint is estimated to result in 3 to 5 times higher levels of carbon monoxide and tar deposition compared to a cigarette. This may come as a surprise to many, as marijuana is generally considered to be not as bad for you as smoking is. In reality, both contain many of the same harmful components. So much so that many respiratory symptoms of smoking cigarettes also appear in those who are chronic users of marijuana. Similar symptoms include airway mucosal injury and inflammation, cough, phlegm production, and wheezing. However, even with all these similarities, something strange happens in terms of pulmonary function in another meta-analysis. In terms of pulmonary function, this study found no evidence that increasing exposure to marijuana adversely affects pulmonary function. Again, pulmonary function refers to your lungs' ability to exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide during respiration. In fact, low-level users of marijuana actually had greater pulmonary function. This association lasted up to those who smoked one joint every day for 7 years. Now, going above this did result in a reversal, meaning that a negative effect was found. However, one joint a day for 7 years is a lot, and it's very surprising that users had higher function. One of these theories suggests that the methods often used to smoke marijuana stretch the lung and increase total lung capacity. For example, smokers will usually take deep, big drags and fill up their lungs with smoke and then hold. And this study is not a fluke. In fact, other studies have looked at marijuana use and pulmonary function and have found no negative effect. Another study on performance with confusing results from smoking marijuana was done in 1986. In it, participants performed 2 tests of progressively more challenging exercises until leg failure. Initially, heart rate was increased by 26% after smoking marijuana, which also led to an increase in VO2 max. However, this difference only lasted until 80%. At maximal heart rate, the heart rate equaled during both conditions. In fact, RVE, VO2, and VCO2, the volume of exhaled carbon dioxide, were the same at maximal exertion in both conditions. However, there was a decrease in that maximal work capacity again. What about post-workout recovery? Could smoking a joint with a shake post-workout have some benefits? Well, a pilot study examined this by having participants use CBD and perform back squats. The researchers then documented muscle damage markers, such as levels of creatine kinase. The results are interesting. On a positive note, CBD use did result in lower levels of markers suggesting a less amount of muscle damage 24 hours post-workout. That sounds great, but the effect on actual performance is not so great. CBD use resulted in a greater decrease in back squat performance. Ironically, the decrease in performance and increase in recovery are believed to be due to the same mechanism, the skeletal muscle relaxation effects of CBD. But that's just one study. Other studies also show benefits of taking marijuana after training. For example, a study from 2020 found that CBD oil can be used to reduce muscle pain from DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness. DOMS is when your muscles begin to hurt 12 to 24 hours post-workout. When compared to placebo, CBD had less discomfort post-workout and then 24, 48, and 72 hours post-workout. At 96 hours post-workout, the CBD group had discomfort scores closer to pre-workout levels than placebo. This reduction in discomfort can prove valuable in improving an athlete's ability to perform repeated bouts of performance. Yet another study found that marijuana not only reduces discomfort of DOMs, but it also decreases several other markers of inflammation. One of the mechanisms for this is the interaction of marijuana with cannabinoid receptors in the hippocampus. These receptors are involved in regulating nociceptive perception and can therefore decrease pain. Further, marijuana also interacts with your cannabinoid receptor 2, found in the endocannabinoid system. This activates immunosuppression through several different mechanisms which play a role in decreasing inflammation. So perhaps smoking weed is best used post-workout with your protein shake, while hitting the bong before a deadlift probably won't lead to any new PRs. Hitting it after could result in less soreness. A more interesting use for athletes is the treatment of TBI, or traumatic brain injury. TBI is one of the fastest growing health concerns for athletes today, specifically for those who participate in contact sports. To date, most of the proposed benefits to sufferers of TBI are theoretical due to a lack of studies. For example, it's believed that the anti-inflammation properties of CBD could act as a powerful neuroprotectant. At that same time, some research has shown that CBD use may significantly reduce psychological behaviors caused by TBI. These are things such as anxiousness, aggressiveness, and depressive behaviors, but again, more studies are needed. Another area of interest is with sleep. Sleep is crucial for athletes and lifters, as they accrue more fatigue and damage than the general public. Unfortunately, most research is limited to subjective measures, meaning we only have testimony from users. Yet again, more studies are needed. The worst time to take marijuana is before your workout. The smoke can affect your respiratory systems, but it also artificially increases your heart rate. As a result, your workout capacity is limited and you'll likely fatigue sooner. While we can say there does seem to be some benefits post-workout, specifically treating DOMs, we need to remember that some of the negative effects of smoking happen to those who smoked only 4 times a month. This means that as far as timing goes, there doesn't seem to be a way to completely mitigate your risk of negative effects. However, there's probably less of an effect on performance if you smoke after training. Another variable to consider: eat your pot brownies. Again, some of the negative effects were seen merely from having THC from marijuana in your system, regardless of the method to consume. However, some of the respiratory effects did not present themselves when consumed in other manners such as eating. This makes sense, as drawing smoke into your lungs is drastically different than a pot brownie being digested by your stomach. Therefore, with what we now know, it appears that the best scenario would be mitigate negative side effects of marijuana by eating it after your workout. Also, less is better. We want to be very clear, this is merely an educated guess based on what we know. Again, our actual knowledge is still heavily lacking. With the rise in acceptance and use, there will likely be an influx of studies to help us have better understandings of its effects on performance. Of course, it would have been cool if marijuana turned out to be the next miracle drug, the next creatine, if you will. However, it doesn't seem to be so at all. So if you don't already partake, you definitely shouldn't rush out to your closest head shop in hopes of setting a new personal best. If you do, know it's not doing you any favors, and it's likely even hurting you. However, it is a bit encouraging to see that it's not as bad as some have made it out to be. Assuming you follow what we recommend, you can help alleviate any bad effects that might present itself. With that said, if you have a choice between a protein shake and a joint, always choose the protein shake. Question: did you know that you can grow muscle just by thinking about it? It's like a bodybuilding Jedi mind trick. Biceps, you will grow. What we're talking about is the mind-muscle connection, and it's been a part of gym wisdom for as long as the bicep curls have been around. Now, of course, there's more to it than curling your arm and demanding your biceps to grow. However, we now have actual scientific evidence to show that this is a real phenomenon. Grow biceps, grow. But wait a minute, did you just smoke a joint? Now we might have a problem, or will we? Is smoking weed going to eliminate this Jedi trick, or could it even make it stronger? Before you decide to smoke and hit the gym, you should be aware of how weed changes your physiological systems and how it could impact your training and adaptations. This video will shed light on the effects of weed on the mind-muscle connection when building muscle. Let's get into it. Bodybuilding is by far the most popular style of strength training you'll find, and this makes sense. Losing weight, building muscle, and getting shredded are a few of the main reasons people go to the gym in the first place. The primary goal of bodybuilding is to build bigger muscles and create a more muscular-looking body. To get this done, bodybuilders have a whole specialized regime they follow, along with a collection of tips and tricks. One of these tricks is something known as the mind-muscle connection. As mentioned above, the mind-muscle connection refers to focusing on a specific muscle while training to increase its activation. If you think about this, it makes sense. We're sure you have banged out a double bicep pose before, right? Did your muscles flex? Did your arms become tired even though you weren't lifting anything? You can also try right now with your quadricep. Stick your leg out and flex your quad. That's basically the mind-muscle connection. As we mentioned in the beginning of the video, this isn't just gym lore. Rather, there have been actual scientific studies to demonstrate that this actually happens. For example, in 2016, a review of literature provided considerable evidence that demonstrated lifters were able to increase muscle activation during various exercises. For example, during the bench press, lifters were able to increase muscle activity in the pectorals by 22%. When using loads equal to 50% of 1 rep max. 50% of your 1 rep max is 50% of the maximum amount of weight you can lift one time. So let's pretend your max for the bench press is 200 pounds. This means that 50% of your 1 rep max is 100 pounds. Now, this load is relatively light, which will be important in just a second. Now, this increase in activation does seem to decrease when using heavier loads, specifically 80% of their 1 rep max. This is likely due to the heavier loads already requiring more muscle activation. When using lighter loads, your body doesn't need to activate so much muscle to lift the load, leaving greater room for an increase. Regardless, it's still increased by 13%. That's 13% more muscle activation merely by thinking about it. It's like unlocking free potential for more muscle growth. And this is just one paper that shows the amazing connection that occurs between the muscles and the brain. As a whole, this system is known as your neuromuscular system. When required, your brain sends signals through neurons known as motor neurons. The signal runs down to the intended muscle and bam, you have a contraction. This is an amazing system comprising numerous complex structures and processes. And when it works amazing. Unfortunately, this isn't always the case. If there is any sort of misfire or miscommunication that occurs as the signal travels from the brain to the muscle will not respond properly. And in fact, this is seen in several neurological diseases. Parkinson's, Tourette syndrome, and cerebral palsy are just a few conditions that can affect the way your muscles move. And this is where the use of marijuana comes into play. The legalization of marijuana has been sweeping across America, with almost half the states legalizing marijuana for recreational use. As so many people use marijuana, it's inevitable that many of them go to the gym. Some are even smoking before they go to the gym as they believe it helps their training. After smoking, a person will experience what's known as a high. Upon inhalation, psychoactive properties in marijuana, known as THC, travel up into the brain and interact with your endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a huge, complex system that is responsible for an array of functions including neurotransmitters and receptors. These receptors are found throughout the central nervous system, providing a role in both physiological and cognitive processes, including pain, mood, and appetite. Upon activation, a person will usually report a sense of euphoria and sedation. However, the endocannabinoid system also plays a role in neural functions, including control of movement and body coordination. That could be a problem. Most people associate smoking weed with feeling relaxed, spacey, and maybe even a little lazy. None of these sound particularly beneficial to pumping iron, but we'll need to look at more information before making a solid judgment. As of today, there have been no specific studies that have looked at the use of marijuana and the mind-muscle connection. However, we do have studies on weed and its effect on cognition and focus in general. By learning from this and then comparing with some anecdotal evidence, we should be able to make a pretty good call. One study from 1995 tried to answer this and examined the effect of long-term chronic use of marijuana on users. Keep in mind, these users were not necessarily lifters. What they found is that the chronic buildup of cannabinoids results in short-term and long-term cognitive impairments. They made two different observations. First is that the ability of users to focus their attention and filter out irrelevant information was hindered. Users were unable to ignore irrelevant stimuli, which ultimately decreased their overall cognitive function. What was interesting is that this was directly related to the amount of years they used, but not the frequency. On the other hand, the speed of processing was delayed significantly based on the frequency but not duration, regardless of how long you've been smoking or how much. It's important to realize that this decrease in cognitive function occurred while not intoxicated. In other words, it doesn't matter if you smoke before or after training, your brain is still affected. In 2020, another study had a different strategy. They aimed to look at the acute effect of marijuana use and cognitive function in their natural environment. If you're wondering what natural environment means, The study utilized surveys and cognitive tests that were delivered to the users' mobile phones to complete while smoking marijuana. Ultimately, this means that the users were high when completing the tasks while in a comfortable setting rather than a lab. Still, the researchers found a distinct decrease in cognition ability after smoking weed. This drop in general cognition and brain function tends to be what's seen in the majority of people who smoke. However, other studies have shown that attention span may not be as affected as other cognitive functions. When controlling for other predictors, this study concluded that results suggests that impairments on measures other than sustained attention were more robustly associated with being an adolescent marijuana user. This simply means that other functions such as memory were affected more with marijuana use than attention span. However, it's also important to note this does not mean it was improved either. So, looking at the research associated with marijuana use and cognitive function, things don't look amazing. It seems the best you could say is that attention isn't as affected as other functions. Still, the mind-muscle connection isn't exactly the same as attention, so it's still not a direct comparison. With that said, there is another source of information apart from scientific research: anecdotal. Anecdotal basically just means testimony of someone's personal experience. Sometimes people can push anecdotal evidence away as if it's completely useless. It's not. It does have value as long as you remember its source. This is especially true in a situation similar to the one we're in now. Keep in mind that while many of the studies do suggest that cognition is impaired, this isn't exactly the same as saying weed impairs the mind-muscle connection. Further, there are no specific studies. Therefore, we are simply turning to anecdotal evidence as it's all we have. When enough people are saying the same thing, it does merit some amount of consideration. However, when talking about intoxicating substances, there's another factor we need to consider. They're intoxicating. How many people swear they're better drivers after drinking? And you think you're a good dancer after a few drinks. The point is that even though people may really think their training has improved, that's not necessarily true. But before we get into the anecdotal evidence, let's first look at the use of weed with exercise in a general sense. In 2019, there was a survey of 605 individuals and their opinion on the use of marijuana and exercise. Of these 605 people, 81.7% endorsed the use of marijuana either before or after exercise. 68.9% used weed within 1 hour before exercise, and 67% of participants opted for cannabis both before and after exercise. What's even more shocking is that individuals who partook in weed had higher levels of daily activity compared to those who don't. 40% of cannabis users met or exceeded the recommendations of the American College of Sports Medicine to complete a minimum of 150 minutes of aerobic exercise per week, while only 28.7% of non-consumers did. There are also other studies that suggest this as well. What this seems to suggest is that smoking weed doesn't automatically mean you're going to be lazy. In fact, it seems to suggest that you're going to do more exercise. Now, we don't know whether this shows causation or correlation, but it is interesting to consider, mainly as most people automatically assume people who smoke weed are lazy. It also begs the question, if weed was a detriment to your workout, why do so many people do it? Interesting? Yes. Proof of an effect on the mind-muscle connection? No. Where can we find evidence? Well, there is a surprising amount of testimony on various forums online, such as Reddit. Reddit is sometimes anything but scientific, but it is a great source to read the real-world experiences of people. As we said before, you just need to keep this in mind. With that said, there is a surprising amount of information there. In fact, there's an entire post entitled, "Does marijuana help you to establish a better mind-muscle connection?" More than half of the responses were positive. You might even say highly positive. Get it? Because they're high? Well, we're not comedians, but many of the comments really are very positive about using weed to enhance the mind-muscle connection. For example, here's a section of one member. "It was intense, I was laser-focused, and my contractions were amazing, especially in areas where I don't normally feel as though I'm working hard enough or stressing. It was great." This type of sentiment can be found throughout the boards along with the same frequency. It's definitely a topic that's spoken about with lifters, as well as something that has been tried, quite a bit actually. Just a few other comments include, "Mind-to-muscle connection is insane, which leads to a better pump. I still lift heavy, but when I'm baked, I love the burning sensation of taking higher rep sets to failure. When I do pull-ups high, I really feel my muscles. Best description I can give is that it feels like my muscle fibers themselves are stretching more or something." In addition to the positive opinions, we did notice one other common idea held by many lifters. This is important as we feel this take on weed and the mind-muscle connection is the most accurate answer. But before we tell you what that is, we wanted to share one more scientific survey done on the use of marijuana in exercise. This piece shocked us when we read it, and so you may further be surprised when you hear this information. In 2022, a scientific survey was conducted with 131 individuals and their use of marijuana and physical activity. Over 60 activities were reported, with hiking, yoga, and aerobic machines being the most frequently reported. So you can find weed being used with a ton of sports and exercise. Still, what's most important is the #1 reason people choose to smoke weed concurrently with exercise. 66% of the people reported that smoking weed helped them to focus and concentrate. The #2 reason at 65% was enhancing mind-body-spirit connection. Now, that's not exactly the same, but it sounds to be pretty close to what we're looking for. Being in tune with your body must be able to help establish that mind-muscle connection. There's even an online fitness workout website with an entire training system built around getting high. On it, they too speak about this mind-spirit connection and how marijuana helps them to get in tune with their own body. Have you ever heard of a runner's high? This is a sense of euphoria and high self-esteem that's commonly reported when people are involved with longer durations of training. At one time, this was just a part of runners' lore. People always reported it, but there had never been any scientific evidence for it. But there is now. Researchers now know that prolonged training increases the levels of a cannabinoid known as endocannabinoid anandamide. Endocannabinoid anandamide acts on your endocannabinoid system and actually produces a high very similar to weed. The point being is that the activation of these receptors is virtually the same when done with exercise or smoking weed, which may suggest that smoking weed brings about these deeper connections. It's where nature and our body systems cross paths. Or maybe that's just trying too hard to make a connection that's not there. We can't say for sure, as this metaphysical aspect of marijuana and the spirit can't be studied, but we must admit it is interesting to identify these similarities found in nature and the human body. We went over a lot of information to think about. Before we make a full analysis on marijuana and the mind-muscle connection, let's put the Jedi trick to the side for a minute and look at weed's other effects on bodybuilding and building muscle. In other words, is it even worth risking? Similar to the mind-muscle connection, it's very difficult to provide a definite answer. While there are studies, results are contradictory and are far from conclusive. However, there's enough to pull together to get a good idea. For those lifters and athletes who partake, a major area that's improved by smoking weed is post-workout and recovery. It's generally reported that smoking weed makes it easy to relax and rest after an intense session. As recovery is crucial for performance, if something allows you to rest better, it makes sense to conclude it's beneficial. One mechanism that may make this possible is the analgesic effect of marijuana. While much of this evidence comes from anecdotal reports, there is some scientific research. For example, in 2021, a group of researchers found evidence that the use of weed might provide some benefit in attenuating muscle damage after a bout of heavy resistance training. One area where marijuana does provide a definite benefit is it stimulates an appetite. Getting a case of the munchies is probably the best known side effect of smoking weed. If you are sitting down all day, this could have a massive effect on your waistline. However, if you're going to the gym and trying to build muscle, your body could use those extra calories. This is really important for hard gainers. So while there are some areas that seem to benefit, there are other areas that seem to see a hit. One of the most common areas reported is overall endurance, workload, and overall strength output. All that to say is that marijuana doesn't seem to be an amazing ergogenic aid for sports performance. If it is, it seems to vary from person to person. So this all leads to the question, does smoking weed affect the mind-muscle connection in bodybuilding? And for that, we can say it seems to, for some people. Remember earlier when we were talking about the anecdotal evidence of individuals, we said that there was another piece of information reported that really sheds light on this whole conundrum. We left out one part when speaking of people's personal experience, and it's telling. For example, one person with a positive response stated this in terms of smoking weed to increase the mind-muscle connection. In the past, hell yeah. And I know plenty of others who would vouch for using pot before exercising. Sounds like a closed case. But this person then goes on to say, but I also know many others who would say that it's detrimental. This is echoed several times in the testimony we read. Some people liked it, some people hated it, some felt that they had a better connection but lifted less weight, some vice versa. We could go on and on about the contradictory reports. What we found interesting is just like that one Redditor, even though they liked it, they admitted they know plenty of people who don't. Let's remember that smoking weed has psychoactive effects, and not everyone will respond to it the same. Further, there are different strains of marijuana which have different properties, further making it difficult to give a single answer. When considering all of the information, when asked if smoking weed will help build a better mind-muscle connection, our conclusion would be, maybe it will, maybe it won't, and maybe it will actually cause a decrease. Now, smoking weed is not like having a coffee before a workout to see if it helps. If it were coffee and you were interested, we would say to go ahead and try and see what happens. That is not what we are going to tell you in this video. We are simply coming to the conclusion that smoking weed does seem to help some people establish a better mind-muscle connection and promote an intense workout per personal reports. On the other hand, some people see no effect. And still, there are others who have a bad reaction to smoking weed before a workout, whether it's an increased heart rate, anxiety, laziness, or lack of endurance. Until there are more studies on this, it will be impossible to give a clear answer. Everyone knows post-workout protein shakes are great for muscle growth. But what about after-work drinks? How does kicking back a few at happy hour or ending the evening with a nightcap affect our muscles? You probably know it's not great for your muscles, but is it actually bad? Well, we can confirm the first part and then tell you no, it's not good. As far as the second part, that's what this video is about. The video is going to explore this topic a little bit deeper and try to find out how many drinks you can have until you start losing your hard-earned gains. Nutrition and gym go together like peanut butter and jelly. They're okay when used alone, but beautiful things happen when you put them together. Generally speaking, people who go to the gym tend to be more careful with what they put in their body at the dinner table. Or do they? Surprisingly, the one area of nutrition where physically active people tend to fail is drinking. And we don't mean drinking water. Studies have shown a strong correlation between physically active individuals and drinking. It's been estimated that 88% of studies that have looked at the relationship between physical activity and drinking alcohol find a positive relationship. While this number does drop when excluding college-age students, it's not much. In total, 75% found a positive relationship. That's a lot. What's even crazier is there actually seems to be a dose response to drinking and physical activity. In other words, the more you drink, the more you exercise. For example, when compared with current abstainers, drinkers perform exercise for longer durations per week. Where it gets interesting is the correlation between the amount of exercise and the amount of drinking. Light drinkers train 5.7 minutes more weekly, moderate drinkers train 10.1 minutes more weekly, and heavy drinkers train 19.9 minutes more per week. Further, if you drink, there's a 10.1% greater chance that you'll exercise vigorously. While we're not going to fully explain the why of this correlation, we are going to tell you what type of effect this drinking can have on your muscles. Even worse, a large percentage of 50 to 65% drink above the level classified as hazardous. As you can guess, this doesn't do anything good for your muscles. And you would be right. It's estimated that 40 to 60% of chronic alcohol abusers suffer from some sort of skeletal muscle disease, as well as muscle atrophy, a condition that causes a gradual loss of muscle mass. It's an obvious sign that drinking not only does nothing good for your muscles, but there's a good chance it'll result in a detriment. This is especially true with chronic heavy drinking. Even when we set aside all of the other unhealthy outcomes of heavy drinking, such as cirrhosis of the liver, alcohol intake still presents other problems for your body composition. Prolonged alcohol abuse can have detrimental effects, such as the total amount of muscle mass a person holds that we just mentioned. Unfortunately, that's not the only study. Research has found plenty of evidence to build a negative relationship between drinking and muscle, or maybe we should say muscle loss. In other words, those who drink more see less muscle growth. Specifically, the research showed that persons who drink regularly 3 or more drinks were the ones who had lower levels of lean body mass. What's more is that this loss wasn't attenuated with physical activity. Now, the participants were elderly men 65 years of age or older, and they weren't necessarily involved in resistance training. Unfortunately, there's not enough research to make a solid conclusion from this. Are the elderly just more prone to the negative effects of alcohol? Is general physical activity not enough to overcome the drop in muscle protein synthesis? We can't say for sure. However, that's 2 studies we've talked about that strongly suggest alcohol can cause greater loss of muscle. That's enough for us to want to learn more. What we can say for sure is that alcohol is not ideal for muscle growth. As you can probably guess, a loss in lean body mass wasn't the only negative effect in the elderly participants. Alcohol use also resulted in greater fat mass and less bone strength. In other words, a higher intake of alcohol has more than a few negative effects on your body. Ideally, lifters wouldn't drink. However, as we heard in the numbers above, this doesn't happen. Therefore, is there a number of drinks that drinkers can have that will mitigate any negative effects on muscle? And what exactly are the negative effects? That's what the rest of this video will look at. Before we go any further, let's first answer this question: what is alcohol? Now, we're not talking about the types of alcohol such as beer, tequila, or whiskey. We're talking about what is the actual compound, alcohol. Alcohol refers to a group of different compounds, so when we say alcohol, we're referring to the type of alcohol you drink. This specific type of alcohol is known as ethanol or ethyl alcohol, which is produced through fermentation of sugars by yeast. It's the active ingredient in alcoholic drinks that's responsible for the euphoric effects when consuming too much. Upon drinking, ethanol is absorbed into the bloodstream and brought to the brain, where it passes the blood-brain barrier. From there, it messes with both your neurotransmitters and neural pathways, neither in a good way. While the neurotransmitters decrease your inhibition, the neural pathways impair your coordination. Combined, they're what gives you a buzz or a drunk feeling. While most are pretty familiar with this feeling, along with its unhealthy side effects, many aren't so sure about what alcohol can do to your muscles. So, what are the effects of alcohol on building muscle? Well, one of the most studied relationships between alcohol and muscle hypertrophy is ethanol's effect on protein synthesis, particularly the mammalian target of rapamycin, more commonly known as mTOR. You see, the amount of muscle you have depends on two processes: muscle protein synthesis, MPS, and muscle protein breakdown, MPB. These processes are always going head-to-head with each other, and whichever rate is higher dictates whether you'll gain muscle or lose muscle. Therefore, your goal is to keep your rate of muscle protein synthesis as high as you can throughout the day while keeping your rates of muscle breakdown low. Now, one of the key signaling pathways involved in muscle protein synthesis is the protein kinase mTOR. Upon stimulation, mTOR phosphorylates will activate several downstream targets and initiate muscle protein synthesis. In other words, mTOR starts. Now, that's a very simplified explanation, as the entire process is terribly complex with multiple different processes and reactions. Unfortunately, this complexity leaves a lot of places where alcohol can affect and disrupt the entire process of building muscle. And it does. In fact, there is disruption both upstream from mTOR signaling as well as downstream. Basically, this means disruption at various locations throughout the entire process. For example, in terms of muscle building, leucine is thought to be the most important amino acid, as its presence directly activates mTOR. However, ethanol has been found to inhibit the level of stimulation that the amino acid leucine has on mTOR. As a result, the rate of muscle protein synthesis is blunted. Another mTOR pathway affected by alcohol is through the actual muscle contraction. Under normal conditions, continuous contractions of a muscle will stimulate muscle protein synthesis. However, when alcohol is introduced, it raises some issues. Research has found that ethanol can impair muscle contractions, which is a mechanical stimulation. What's interesting about this study is that the researchers had originally hypothesized that the alcohol would not have an effect on muscle protein synthesis by way of muscle contractions. That's because this pathway is independent of all other known pathways affected by muscle. Perhaps there are simply more pathways for mTOR and muscle protein synthesis, but more research needs to be done, as we still don't understand all the ways that alcohol affects muscle protein synthesis. However, we do know one thing: alcohol affects our ability to build muscle in more ways than one. It doesn't look good for alcohol. Up to now, all the research and studies we've mentioned are more theoretical. What does this effect look like in real life with training? Are these drops in muscle protein synthesis enough to actually alter the amount of muscle we grow? Let's see what some research says. Well, one study from 2014 asked the question we've all thought before: what would happen if you added a couple of shots to your post-workout drink? No, seriously, that's what they did. 8 physically active young men performed a training program, followed by either drinking protein and alcohol, or carbohydrate and alcohol immediately after their training. They then had the same drink 4 hours later. Rates of muscle protein synthesis were then measured at 2 hours post-exercise and 8 hours post-exercise to compare. The first thing they found was that the rate of muscle protein synthesis was raised for all the groups. This includes the alcohol-only group, as the rise from training was enough to overcome the deficit from the alcohol. No problem then, yeah? Drink up. Well, not quite, so you should keep your glasses down for a minute. While muscle protein synthesis was still raised in the alcohol groups, it doesn't mean there wasn't a negative effect. When the alcohol was consumed alone, the participants saw a 37% reduction rate in muscle protein synthesis. While the deficit wasn't as great as when alcohol was consumed with protein, it still dropped 24%. But that's not the only study that had participants throw back a few after their lifting session. There's another study that looked at the effects of alcohol on muscle growth after resistance training. In addition, they also examined if there are differences between the sexes. A group of 10 men and 9 women followed an identical resistance training program consisting of 6 sets of squats. Immediately after their sessions, they drank either a placebo or an alcoholic drink. Further, muscle tissue samples were taken 3 times pre-workout, 3 hours post-workout, and 5 hours post-workout. The researchers found that the resistance training elicited similar increases in mTOR-C1 signaling in men and women. However, alcohol had a small negative effect on men. So just like the previous study we mentioned, the mTOR signaling in men still increased, albeit at a lower rate. This again suggests overall resistance training can overpower the negative effect of alcohol. However, it will still slow down your process. What these 2 studies seem to suggest is that while alcohol does have a negative effect, the positive effect of resistance training and protein is greater. Therefore, you will still see growth, but it'll be attenuated. While it's pretty clear that alcohol will have a negative effect on muscle protein synthesis, that's not the only problem. Alcohol can also magnify loss in performance post-training, which hints at blunting the recovery process. To be clear, a loss in performance is normal after training as the muscle is fatigued and damaged. However, when alcohol is added to the equation, the loss in performance is exacerbated. In a study, researchers had 10 healthy men perform 300 eccentric contractions of the quadriceps muscle to produce muscle damage. They then consumed ethanol or orange juice. This was then repeated with the opposite leg 2 weeks later, and the other beverage was consumed. Measurements were taken pre-exercise, then 36 hours later to measure post-exercise performance. The researchers found that alcohol produced a greater loss in isometric peak force of 39% versus 29%, and eccentric peak forces of 44% versus 27%. Even a larger detriment was found in the average force created, demonstrating alcohol affected repeat efforts to a greater degree. For isometric average peak torque, the orange juice saw a 29% drop, while alcohol saw a 41% drop. For concentric average peak torque, orange juice saw a 32% drop, while the alcohol group dropped by 43%. And the greatest drop was seen for the eccentric average peak torque. The orange juice group saw a 26% drop, while the alcohol group saw a massive 45% drop. While that study seems pretty conclusive that alcohol affects the recovery process, we must now turn our attention to this meta-analysis. A meta-analysis is a scholarly review of all studies on a specific subject. In this case, it's all the studies of alcohol's effect on recovery. After all the research, they concluded that several recovery markers saw a negative effect. This includes an increase in cortisol, while testosterone, plasma amino acids, and rates of muscle protein synthesis decrease. However, all performance levels were, quote, unmodified. This includes force, power, muscular endurance, muscle soreness, and rate of perceived exertion. Let's look at a study that saw this play out. In this study, participants drink alcohol during a resistance program with HIIT, high-intensity interval training. It's known as the beer HIIT study. In total, 83 participants aged between 18 to 40 took part in the study and were put into one of 5 groups, including one non-training group. Now, the other 4 groups were made up of 2 groups that drank an alcoholic drink throughout the training program and 2 that drank non-alcoholic drinks, which acted as placebo. Within the 2 alcohol groups, one was assigned to drink beer, while the other drank vodka. Men would have 1 serving at lunch and 1 serving at dinner, which equaled 2 to 3 drinks, while women would have 1 serving at dinner, which equaled 1 to 2 drinks. As for the training program, rather than perform resistance training, the researchers decided to use HIIT with weight-bearing exercises, including 8 weight-bearing exercises of the frontal plank, high knee-ups, horizontal row, battle rope, squat, deadlift, push-up, and burpees. At the end of the study, it was found that the participants of all groups increased lean mass while decreasing fat mass. Further, there seems to have been no negative effect from alcohol consumption. It should be noted also that this study used a HIIT protocol rather than a proper program built for muscle growth. While HIIT is a great method of training to improve VO2 max, it's not ideal for building muscle. However, even a plan that was suboptimal for muscle building still resulted in an increase in muscle mass. Since now we've primarily been discussing the direct effect that alcohol has on your muscles, in that same breath, alcohol consumption can also affect your body composition and muscle growth indirectly through modifying your behavior. One of those is known as the drunchies. This is the phenomenon where we search for the greasiest fast food we can find after a night out. There's a reason why every bar street has a pizza place that stays open later than the bars. If you know what we're talking about, you'll also know that these places are always packed into the hours way past midnight. The point is that when we drink in excess, we tend to have big cravings. If you've ever felt ravenous as if you haven't eaten in a week, that's for you. We now have evidence that shows it's not entirely your fault, and there's a reason for it. Scientists have found that alcohol interacts with a group of neurons known as AGRP neurons. These AGRP neurons are what researchers believe to be the root of the problem. Why this is a problem is that the AGRP cells are starvation activated. In other words, they're activated during times of starvation to encourage rapid overeating. It's important to note that this stimulation is not dependent on an actual lack of energy or calories. This means that even if you had a nice big dinner before you went out, alcohol will still stimulate the AGRP neurons and cause you to order one of everything on the menu. Now, generally speaking, alcohol is already empty calories. These are foods and drinks that have no significant nutritional value but are high in calories. As a standard drink can have anywhere from 90 to 200 calories, 3 drinks will add 270 to 600 calories. However, if you can't control your hunger, then you go eat a bunch of junk food after, which has a lot of extra calories. It's safe to say on a night out, guys can easily eat 1,000 calories that weren't a part of their original meal plan. While these calories don't necessarily have a huge effect on your muscles, they will contribute to an increase in fat, which results in undesired changes in body composition. But that's not all. Another indirect effect of alcohol is on sleep. Sleep is crucial for optimum muscle growth, as it's the period where our body is in repair mode, such as the secretion of certain hormones like testosterone. In fact, research has shown that a single night of total sleep deprivation is sufficient to induce anabolic resistance and a pro-catabolic environment. Definitely not ideal for building muscle. Unfortunately, disrupting your sleep is exactly what alcohol does. In fact, even if you fall asleep after drinking, especially if you get drunk, the alcohol can still lead to poor quality sleep. Alcohol's effect on your sleep and hunger is more evidence that it causes an uphill battle with building muscle. Now that you know alcohol is definitely not the best thing for you if building muscle is your main goal, however, it's not going to nullify your gains completely, what do? Well, the first thing you need to do is personally assess how important building muscle is. If your number one goal is to put on as much muscle as you can in a certain period of time, you should definitely refrain from drinking. As mentioned, you can still build muscle while drinking, but it'll probably be attenuated. This can obviously depend on the individual along with how much you actually drink. Now, if you want to build muscle but it's not necessarily the most important aspect of your life, then you should follow a few basic rules. The first and most important primary rule is to only drink in moderation. Remember the beer hit study where the athletes were still able to gain muscle even though they had 2 to 3 drinks a day? While we definitely don't recommend you drink daily, we absolutely recommend keeping your consumption low in a single sitting. Studies show that chronic drinking and binge drinking have the greatest negative effects, both on your gains and honestly on your life and health in general. Your liver will thank you for refraining, that's for sure. This next tip has to do with your body composition rather than performance. If you choose to drink, consider sticking to the spirits, as they're on the lower end of the calories. A shot of tequila, rum, or vodka tends to have 70 to 90 calories. On the other hand, a beer can have 120 to 150 calories on average, and mixed drinks can easily have 200 or more per drink. Again, in a perfect world, we would never drink alcohol or eat processed foods or eat sweets or any of that. However, this world isn't perfect, nor should it be. Enjoying these things in moderation isn't going to have any major detriment to your progress. Emphasis on moderation. On the other hand, it's not going to help you at all either. Therefore, make the correct choice that's right for your lifestyle and goal. If you do decide to drink, stick to the tips we just gave you. However, if drinking isn't a huge aspect of your life, staying away completely is definitely the best choice. Protein shake or a pint of beer. The choice is yours. Legalization of weed has been spreading all across the United States at a very high rate. And this doesn't just include medicinal use, but recreational use as well. Along with this has come a higher interest in its use for almost everything. It seems that in just about every area of our life, someone claims weed can make it better. Sleep, diet, cancer, sex, studying, headaches, depression, everything. As such, it only makes sense that people would wonder if they could use the effects of weed to help improve their performance and build muscles. However, some people are also concerned about its interactions with other supplements such as creatine. Creatine is the most widely used supplement on the market, meaning a lot of people are using it. It's known for its proven ability to increase size, strength, and overall performance with its use. However, in order for creatine to work, you need to be able to absorb it. Will the effects of smoking weed affect your body's ability to absorb creatine? You may be surprised about the truth of weed and creatine. What do you get when you mix the most popular drug on the planet with the most popular supplement? Watch to find out. And more importantly, have you been killing your creatine gains? Before we can get into the more specifics of how or if smoking weed affects the absorption of creatine, we should step back for a minute or two. We first need to find out how they interact with the body independent of one another first before we can fully understand if they interact with one another. Let's start with creatine. We have spoken a ton about creatine as it's all the rage these days. You know how we feel about it. If you're not taking it, you're missing out. There may be a good chance you have heard of this, but we're still going to go over what it is and how it affects your body. So, creatine is a non-proteinogenic amino acid, meaning it's not involved in the structure of protein. Still, it's a vital compound your body requires. Its primary job is its role in synthesizing the high-energy compound known as ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, meaning it has 3 phosphates attached and is the body's energy currency. It's required to help power every muscle contraction, making it essential that your body has an adequate supply. In order for your body to sustain its supply of creatine, your body can either synthesize it internally or you consume it through your diet. And no, it's not found in weed. In fact, it's only found in animal products, especially red meat and fish. When consumed, it goes through a process where a phosphate compound is attached to it, and then the vast majority, 95%, is stored in the muscles, while the other 5% is stored in the brain or testes. When your muscle requires energy to power a contraction, one of the 3 phosphates attached to ATP breaks off, releasing energy. This also results in another compound known as ADP, adenosine diphosphate, which now only has 2 phosphates. Now the problem is that ADP is low energy and isn't able to supply any more energy. Therefore, when needed, creatine phosphate is released and goes through a reaction to release the phosphate compound so that it can attach to the ADP to become another molecule of ATP. Another part of this reaction is a byproduct known as creatinine. Creatinine is a commonly measured compound in the blood to test the health and function of the kidneys. You might not think it, but this is actually going to be important. You'll want to hear this. Yet another compound you'll need to be familiar with is an enzyme known as creatine kinase. Creatine kinase is an enzyme that's involved in transfer of a phosphate compound to creatine to become the stored version creatine phosphate. Generally, muscles that are more active will have higher levels of creatine kinase. Remember this as well. With that said, under normal conditions, most people walk around with their creatine stores at about 60% to 80% full. Therefore, they will supplement with creatine to fill their stores up to 100%. As a result, when these people go to the gym, they have more creatine, which allows for more production of ATP, which means more work can be performed, which equals greater muscle and strength gains over time. Now let's look at weed. At its core, weed is the slang term for the cannabis plant. It's a psychoactive compound that acts on the central nervous system upon use, usually through inhalation, by way of one of its many psychoactive compounds, including a group known as cannabinoids. Of the dozens of the cannabinoids that exist within cannabis, the primary one, which is responsible for most of its psychoactive effects, is known as tetrahydrocannabinol, better known as THC. Within your central nervous system are numerous cannabinoid receptors. The main receptors are CB1 receptors, which are primarily found in the brain but also in the lungs, liver, and kidneys, and CB2 receptors, which are primarily found in the immune system. Upon smoking, the cannabinoids in marijuana will interact with these receptors, resulting in the high. What's interesting about marijuana is that depending on the strain used, an individual can experience a completely different high. With that said, a typical high is a mixture of pain relief, relaxation, feeling goofy, sedated, and even euphoria. Cool, but what does this have to do with creatine? Let's first take a look at the 2 compounds we spoke about before, creatinine and creatine kinase. There have been some claims before that heavy marijuana use can cause an increase in these compounds, which could be problematic with creatine use. Allegedly. As mentioned, creatinine is found as a byproduct of the creatine phosphate, providing the phosphate compound for ATP. It also acts as a common biomarker to measure the function of the kidneys. In the past, creatine use has been reported to be damaging to the kidneys, resulting in higher creatinine levels. First off, these claims are not true, at least to the extent made in these reports. There have been case studies where people who have already damaged kidneys had higher levels of creatinine after creatine use, but this would make sense. Creatine use does work the kidneys a bit more, so if they're already damaged, it would result in higher levels. However, to date, there have been numerous long-term and short-term studies that have shown no side effects in healthy individuals when taking creatine. But with this in mind, there have also been some concerns that using marijuana can cause an increase in creatinine levels. However, most studies have shown this to be a non-issue. For example, in 2018, there was a large cross-sectional study released that used almost 14,000 adults from age 18 to 59 years of age throughout the years of 2007 and 2014. The goal of the study was to establish any relation between marijuana use, creatinine levels, and odds of having chronic kidney disease. But they found none. Following the study, they reported, "We did not observe any clinically significant association between current or past self-reported marijuana use and measures of kidney function." So in reality, it doesn't seem as though either of these two substances has a negative effect on your creatinine levels or your kidney function. Now, if both of these did cause a rise in your creatinine levels, then you may have a problem. Using two compounds that increase your creatinine levels would signal you are overworking your kidneys and could result in developing renal failure. In a similar claim, it's been suggested that marijuana use can cause an increase in creatine kinase levels. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of information on this relationship either. However, there is one study which has shown a relationship: high marijuana use has been found to increase the amount of creatine kinase levels. Now, it should be noted that this study specifically studies marijuana users who actually smoke so much they experience psychosis. If you're smoking that much, we think you're probably dealing with another set of issues bigger than any possible interactions with creatine. However, this still doesn't necessarily relate to the absorption of creatine. One area which marijuana may help with the absorption of creatine is with the munchies. One of the most well-known side effects of marijuana is the very unscientific term, the munchies. This refers to the common urge to eat food, usually heavy carbs and fat. Scientists aren't exactly sure why this takes place, but they believe it to have something to do with THC's interaction with the olfactory systems. When these systems are activated, the individual will have stronger reactions to the smell of food, which can trigger an insatiable appetite. But as mentioned, this is likely just part of the equation. But what does this have to do with creatine? Well, when we consume creatine, it must be absorbed into our muscles. Studies have shown that the increased consumption of food will result in a greater amount of creatine being absorbed. If you have issues with eating food, smoking weed can give you the motivation you need to eat to help enhance the absorption of creatine. In fact, increasing appetite is one of the medicinal uses of marijuana for those with various conditions such as cancer. Now, eating more food to absorb creatine is definitely not the same as doing it for cancer. However, if you are a light eater, increasing your intake could help improve creatine absorption. With that said, this definitely wouldn't be a negative response though. The main problem is there seems to be very little information on any interactions with marijuana and creatine. In fact, when looking at these two drugs on WebMD.com drug interaction page, searching cannabis and creatine leads to 0 results. Now, this doesn't mean there aren't negative interactions, it simply means that there is no information on it, at least in scholarly sources. There does seem to be a lot of information or misinformation regarding these two substances anecdotally in internet forums. A major one is that creatine causes your muscles to absorb water while smoking marijuana dehydrates you. Therefore, when you take this together, you can become dangerously dehydrated. Let's break this up and look at them separately. Does creatine dehydrate you? It's true that when you consume creatine, it will draw water into your muscles. However, this does not lead to what we call dehydration. In fact, having muscles full of water is a good thing. In fact, numerous studies have examined this claim. They found that not only does creatine not result in dehydration or cramping, athletes who take creatine have less dehydration-related conditions and even better performance. Now let's look at marijuana. People assume that marijuana dehydrates them as it can cause you to feel thirsty and dry your throat. This even has a term that smokers use, cotton mouth. While this does occur, it's not necessarily dehydration. When you smoke weed, THC interacts with the submandibular glands in the mouth. These glands are responsible for producing saliva and THC turns them off. This means your mouth can't produce saliva, thus drying out your mouth and causing the sensation of being dehydrated. But you're not dehydrated, therefore, as neither of these compounds cause you to become dehydrated, using them together isn't going to make you dehydrated. With that said, it's always a good idea to be mindful of your hydration levels. Other than this, many of the claims about creatine and marijuana seem to come out of left field with zero reason to believe there's any truth. We're talking about claims that the two compounds can make you throw up, increase chances of psychosis, panic attacks, and other claims. There's no way to tell what to make of these claims or why that would even occur. Given the fact these claims are often paired with other pieces of misinformation, we wouldn't take it seriously. Now, we can also consider the fact that a surprising amount of athletes smoke weed. There is no exact number, especially regarding bodybuilders, but there's evidence that seems to suggest use of weed is more prevalent in the athletic community. Further, those who smoke more tend to train more. So what does this have to do with creatine? Well, creatine is the most widely used sports supplement worldwide. Anywhere from 9% to 46% of athletes are using creatine at any given time. This means there must be a relatively large amount of crossover. Also, let's remember that Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno smoked a joint together in Pumping Iron, the classic bodybuilding documentary. Point being is if there were serious ill effects that weed hampered one's training, we would probably hear more stories about bad side effects. This is obviously speculation, but it's something to consider when trying to determine if these two drugs are bad for one another. So let's ask the theoretical question, what if? What if you smoked weed during your training program? Would it even help you apart from any effect with creatine? This is yet another area where studies are lacking, although it doesn't seem so, at least in a significant manner. Numerous reviews have come to this conclusion, such as this one from 2017. It compared the results of 15 studies and concluded weed offers no advantageous benefit for strength or aerobic performance. In fact, it may even decrease strength if anything. Smoking weed before training time is especially frowned upon. Researchers have found numerous performance deficits, including reduced ability to maintain effort or physical maximal work capacity, increased heart rate, breathing rate, and oxygen demand. In addition, balance and agility can be hindered. So why would an athlete partake? Well, it seems that if there are any legitimate benefits of smoking weed, it comes after training. This is particularly the analgesic effects as general relation for recovery. It could also help improve sleep quality if that's an issue. Research on weed and performance is still in its infancy. This is somewhat surprising due to the prevalence of its use, but could be due to ethical concerns as its use has just recently become legalized. Therefore, we'll probably need to wait another couple years to start seeing any questions. We have got bona fide answers concerning weed and performance. With all this said, it goes back to the main point of this video. Does smoking weed affect the absorption of creatine or affect its role on muscle growth? In the beginning of the video, we said you'd be surprised. Well, we were surprised by how such little information there actually is. Unfortunately, there's not, especially in this specific context. Therefore, we are not able to say that smoking cannabis definitely doesn't affect supplementation of creatine. However, after considering all the information that we can, there's no reason to believe that smoking weed would affect your creatine supplementation. To be clear, this doesn't mean it will help or magnify any benefits either. It seems that these two compounds act independently for the most part and won't interact with one another. We think it's important to remember that we are always consuming creatine all the time. In the beginning of the video, we discussed what creatine is and why we supplement with it. Assuming you eat meat, you are consuming creatine without supplementing. Supplementing is just helping give you a little extra. Therefore, it seems that if weed did affect the absorption of creatine, it would likely have an effect wherever its source is. Regardless, let's keep in mind that a large portion of people taking creatine are probably also smoking weed. Considering that 80% of creatine users see results, it's safe to assume that this includes weed users. Have you ever been chugging down a protein shake before an intense workout session and wondered, does this thing actually help, or am I just guzzling down money that I could be spending on protein-rich meals instead? Then worry no more, because we've got the answers. They just may not be what you think. Oh, and be sure to stick around for the end. We'll walk you through exactly how much and when to consume your protein for optimal results. Whether it works or not, protein supplements are big business. The sports supplement industry rakes in over $27 billion every year, and rising. While we'd love to say the supplement industry only cares about your health and puts your health over profit, we can't. At the end of the day, the supplement industry is like any other industry whose primary job is to make money, so we just can't take those companies at their word on the effectiveness of their products. While some health and workout supplements veer on the side of snake oil, It's not quite the same with protein powder. Why? Because at its core, protein powder is just processed food. So why take it other than real food when you're looking to build mass fast? During the refining process that turns raw food into protein powder, protein is extracted from real food sources and is then broken down further into a fine powder. What this does is it breaks down the protein, or pre-digests it if you will, meaning you're able to absorb and utilize the amino acids it contains much faster. Now, under normal circumstances, you don't really need a fast supply of amino acids. Just eat some steak and the amino acids will gradually be released. Using protein powder during your daily routine offers no real benefits other than being cheap and convenient, which is still a plus. However, there is one period in the day of particular interest. That's right, it's the post-workout. Whether you're playing sports, hitting the weights, or just working on your cardio, anything that causes minor muscle damage, typically tied to healthy exercise. After these moments, your body is thrown into a highly anabolic state by a dramatic rise in muscle protein synthesis. This is the process that repairs muscle. In this state, your body craves more amino acids to rebuild. It's like a bunch of construction workers all hyped up on Red Bull and ready to work. The only thing they need is bricks to build, and those bricks are amino acids. Now, you don't have to eat protein powder, as your body will have pools of amino acids it can pull from. These are the leftovers from previous meals that are just waiting to be used. In addition, you could even just eat whole foods to provide protein. However, as mentioned, this must be digested before the muscles can access the amino acids. And it's here we find why we specifically take protein powder after training. Taking a protein powder that is already processed and broken down floods your bloodstream with amino acids. At the same time, it also causes an increase in muscle protein synthesis. It's a cheap and convenient method that makes it incredibly easy to create an optimum environment for building muscle. So, how does this work? Well, that's what we want to find out. One of the main reasons lifters take protein powder is for muscle growth. So, does protein powder actually drive more gains? Spoiler alert, yes, it does. A meta-analysis from 2012 examined studies with over 600 participants to determine if protein supplementation increased muscle mass. To be clear, this study specifically looked at the intake of protein powder post-workout. In addition, it only examined studies that were at least 6 weeks long, as it's believed protein supplementation benefits come from long-term use. You can't just chug protein shakes once and be summer body ready. After a full analysis, they made a pretty big find. When compared to placebos, protein supplementation resulted in a 38% greater increase in fat-free mass. So, if you gained 10 pounds of muscle without protein supplementation, you could have gained an extra 3.6 pounds with it. Right here, it's important to note that, as you can see, you can still increase muscle mass without protein supplementation. However, it will just capitalize on the hard work you put in the gym. So why settle for 10 pounds when you could have 13.8 just by drinking a tasty, cheap shake? Sounds like a no-brainer to us. A more recent meta-analysis was then performed in 2017, which examined a total of 1,863 participants. This makes it one of the largest meta-analyses to date, almost as large as you'll be if you keep chasing those gains. Again, when comparing protein supplementation with resistance training alone, the supplementation produced better results. This included a 27% increase in fat-free mass, as well as a 14% increase in muscle fiber cross-section area when compared to the placebo. One interesting note made in this meta-analysis was that protein supplementation was more effective for resistance-trained individuals. Why could this be the case? We suspect it's because it's easier for non-trained individuals to build muscle. When an untrained person starts training, gaining muscle is relatively easy. There's a lot more wiggle room with diet and training to see positive results in muscle growth. However, as you become more advanced, putting on muscle becomes increasingly difficult. We want to note this doesn't mean that untrained individuals did not see increases in muscle mass. They do. What that means is they saw similar results whether they consumed a protein supplement or not. Now that's two huge meta-analyses that both confirm that protein powder supplementation results in an increase in muscle mass. This is the general consensus since studies began on protein supplementation. For example, this study way back from 2005. In it, 22 young, healthy men partook in resistance training methods for 14 weeks. When examining all the variables, everything was similar. One real difference was their post-workout meal. The control group simply ate a serving of carbohydrates. while the experimental group consumed a supplement containing 25 grams of protein, 16.6 grams from whey, and the remaining from other sources. After 14 weeks, the protein group did see a small advantage in strength with the squat jump. In the squat jump, an athlete descends into a semi-squat position and holds the position for approximately 3 seconds before takeoff. Here, the protein group saw a 9% improvement in height, whereas the carb group saw none. However, in the counter-movement vertical jump, there was no difference as both groups saw an increase of 10%. The counter-movement vertical jump is performed when the athlete starts from a standing position and initiates a downward movement, which is immediately followed by an upward movement leading to takeoff. Now, in terms of muscle hypertrophy, the protein group really outshined the carbohydrate group and saw significantly greater growth. Specifically, the protein group saw an 18% greater increase in type 1 fibers. These are smaller fibers that have less force capability, yet possess awesome endurance capability. In addition, they saw a 26% increase in the cross-section area of the muscle. 26%. The growth in the carb group was just negligible. Now let's go back to the increase in squat jumps. What's going on here? Why would the protein supplementation group see a larger squat jump than the placebo? Well, one of the reasons for the increase in the squat jump was thought to have occurred due to the increase in type 2 muscle fibers. Remember, these are the fibers that are responsible for creating a high amount of force. To look at the association between strength gains and muscle gains more, let's revisit the 2012 meta-analysis from earlier in the video. Remember, it reviewed 22 trials with protein's effect on muscle mass. However, it also examined gains in strength and concluded that the protein supplementation does in fact contribute to gains in strength, specifically 1 rep max strength, or the maximum amount of weight you can lift at one time. Now let's dig into the muscle hypertrophy results a little deeper. The results specifically showed a 45% larger increase in type 1 muscle fibers and a 55% larger increase in type 2 fibers. This increase was then related to the increase in strength, where it was found that a greater increase in muscle fiber CSA was accompanied by a 20% greater increase in 1 rep max leg press strength. Basically, the muscles with a larger increase in type 2 muscle fibers saw greater improvements in strength. To briefly explain this, an increase in muscle size and muscle strength are related but can occur from completely different mechanisms. Strength occurs through the improvement of the neuromuscular system, while the increased muscle mass occurs through the addition of contractile units of the muscle. This means that strength can increase independently from muscle growth. The existing muscle learns to produce more force. At the same time, when a muscle grows, it adds contractile units, which means the potential for strength goes up as well. So strength can go up through improvements in the neuromuscular system as well as the addition of contractile units. Therefore, strength and size will grow together, but it's not always a one-to-one increase. However, the muscle growth that occurred from the protein supplementation in the study also enabled the muscle to create more strength than if no muscle growth had occurred. Lucky for us, we can also turn to the other, more recent meta-analysis for more evidence of the effect of protein supplementation on strength. The studies in this meta-analysis utilized a variety of 1 rep max testing, such as bench press, arm curl, squat, and lat pull-down. Together, participants saw an average of a 9% increase in 1 rep max strength. However, as noted in the study, a 9% increase is pretty cool, but it's not a magic bullet. Your programming and exercise selection will likely have a much greater effect on strength gains. At that same time, we'll take the 9% increase if all we need to do is drink a thick, delicious ice cream cake batter protein shake. But perhaps the clearest illustration of protein supplementation benefiting an athlete is with pre-sleep protein. Pre-sleep protein is a relatively new area of study that examines the usefulness of drinking a protein supplement 30 minutes before sleep. Usually, this is done with casein protein, a slow-digesting protein. Unlike whey, which floods the bloodstream with amino acids quickly, casein releases a slower, steadier stream of amino acids. As a result, when taken before sleep, it increases the amount of amino acids in the bloodstream all night as you sleep, as well as muscle protein synthesis. This is effective at increasing muscle growth. While there's still a lot to learn about nighttime protein, the studies we have as of now are very promising. A meta-analysis from 2020 looked at all the studies to date and analyzed the results that a pre-sleep protein supplement had on muscle protein synthesis and other outcomes. It found that a 20 to 40 gram serving of casein protein increases muscle protein synthesis overnight. With that said, the general recommendation is on the larger end of that spectrum, 30 to 40 grams. That's great, but does this transfer to actual muscle growth? Well, pre-sleep protein was found to have positive benefits on 1-rep max strength, muscle size, and an increase in the cross-sectional area of muscle fibers. What makes this benefit specific to protein powder is that protein powder allows you to eat a large amount of protein quickly and with low calories. To reach that same amount of protein and calories with whole food, you need to eat 2 whole skinless chicken breasts with no seasoning or sauce. Yummy! Give me the cookies and cream protein shake, please. To our knowledge, there's been no study that's looked at whole food pre-sleep, but we imagine it's just not practical to do it on a consistent basis. And this is really the main benefit of protein powder. At certain times, having a quick, convenient protein source that actually tastes good is a very nice tool to have. In fact, this was the consensus of one of, if not the only study we know of that looked at using strictly whole foods for protein intake, including post-exercise. Yes, you can definitely only eat whole foods, however, it is difficult. The research concluded, however, obtaining dietary protein exclusively from whole foods may not always be convenient or feasible due to a variety of reasons including cost, palatability, competitive or training schedule, and volume of whole food that needs to be consumed to meet protein requirement. Protein supplements remain a convenient complementary nutritional strategy for physically active adults to meet protein recommendations at select meals throughout the day. And that should be your main takeaway. Protein powder is a cheap, convenient protein source that can be strategically used to optimize training outcomes and muscle growth. Taken at any other time of day, protein powder is really just another food source that makes reaching protein intake easy. So yes, protein powder works because it is just that, protein. So we've clearly shown that protein powder offers benefits, but what does that mean for you? Well, for one, it's important to point out that the meta-analyses specifically mentioned prolonged use. While there are some measurable outcomes that can occur overnight, meaningful adaptations take a long period of consistent use. Therefore, your nutritional strategy for protein should become a constant. In addition, consider your daily protein intake rather than just a single serving. The daily protein intake for athletes and lifters is much more than the general population's recommended daily intake due to the increased stress and damage placed on the muscle. Therefore, the general recommendation by leading sports researchers, such as the ISSN, is anywhere from 1.6 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you're in a caloric surplus, you can get away with the lower end. If you're losing weight with a caloric deficit, stick to the higher end. Not that you would, but you can probably guess this shouldn't all be eaten in one sitting. Studies have shown that spreading your protein throughout the day can optimize protein's role in the support and maintenance of your muscle mass. This is likely due to the spreading out of the spike in muscle protein synthesis from a single meal that lasts anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. Therefore, spread your total protein intake across 4 to 6 servings throughout the day, every 3 to 4 hours. The only thing to keep in mind here is that each serving should contain a minimum of 20 to 25 grams of protein. This tends to be the threshold for maximum spikes in MPS. What that means is that you can definitely consume more than this and will probably have to eat your total daily intake. However, that spike in muscle protein synthesis will not be as dramatic as it is up to the 25 grams when it starts to level off. Other than that, there are 2 occasions which merit special attention. First is your post-workout feeding. It used to be taught that you had 60 minutes post-workout to consume a meal. This was to capitalize on the spike of muscle protein synthesis from working out. We now know it isn't exactly true. As mentioned, the spike in MPS lasts much longer than 60 minutes. However, it does start to slowly decline. As long as you eat every 3 to 4 hours, you don't need to worry about it. However, we still advise to eat protein sooner rather than later, just like in the studies. At the same time, you might want to eat a larger amount of protein at this time. Before, we said that each serving should be at least 20 grams, as this is the threshold for maximal increases in MPS. However, after training, studies show that 40 grams can still cause a greater increase than 20 grams. Either way, it's a good strategy to make your post-workout meal your largest meal of the day. The second time is pre-sleep, which we just talked about. 30 to 40 grams of casein protein 30 minutes before you go to sleep, and you'll be good. Now, when it comes to protein powder, you can technically eat it for any of your protein feedings. Heck, you could eat it for all of your protein intake, but we wouldn't recommend that. You still want to get most of your protein from real food sources. This is to ensure the intake of other nutrients such as vitamins and minerals, as well as other compounds such as creatine, which comes from the meat. Don't fall into the trap of thinking the protein in powder is in any way superior to that in whole foods. It's literally the same thing. Again, we recommend post-workout and pre-sleep, perhaps as a snack or part of a breakfast smoothie, and you're good to go. And most importantly of all, remember that protein powder is a supplement. Just like all other supplements, it should supplement your diet. It shouldn't be 80% of your focus. Rather, the majority of your focus should be on eating whole foods and hitting your calories and macros. If you do that, 95% of the work is done. Then your focus on supplements, such as how to use protein powder, could give you the little bump in your performance you're looking for. World-famous bodybuilder Rick James once said, "Cocaine is a hell of a drug." Well, maybe he's not a bodybuilder, but Rick James did say that, which is perhaps the most famous quote ever attributed to cocaine. And he's not lying. Cocaine is thought to be the third most common illicit substance behind weed and alcohol. Cocaine is a step above weed in its hardcoreness and can produce some very strong highs. Being that it's a powerful stimulant, it only makes sense that some bodybuilder at some point figured that it could be a beneficial supplement to help power through some massive weights in the gym. In theory, yes, that makes sense. More energy equals more work. However, in practice, well, we're gonna have to find out. Could cocaine be the pre-workout you've been looking for? And trust us, you'll want to stick around as there is a relationship you will not see coming. But let's hold off on that because it will throw this whole video upside down. So let's dig into what cocaine is and what effects it has on the body. Cocaine is derived from the leaves of the coca plant. And no, this is not the same as the cacao plant where chocolate is derived from its beans. This has nothing to do with this topic, but we figured we'd address it as we're here. Back to cocaine. The coca plant is largely found in South America, where it is grown as a cash crop for its leaves. Its properties are so potent that researchers believe that it played a large role in the large expansion of Incan Empire. Laborers and soldiers were said to work longer and harder due to their practice of chewing its leaves. That's a hell of a drug. Nowadays in the Western world, the chewing of leaves is rare as another preferred method of administration is used. Well, after the harvesting of its leaves, the coca leaves go under a series of processes that deliver the white powder that we know today as cocaine. This powder is then divided out into thin lines where a person will utilize something called insufflation, the technical term for snorting up the nose. And this is when you get to its effects. But seriously, if it's actually believed to have helped workers move massive stones all day, what the heck does it do to your body? The term cocaine that is used to describe the white powder is actually the name for the primary psychoactive alkaloid found in coca plants. Cocaine acts on the central nervous system and brings about increased sensations of alertness, well-being, euphoria, increased energy and motor activity, and sometimes increased sexuality. Compared to other drugs, the effects are relatively short, which is why a user will take numerous lines throughout an extended period of time. Upon inhalation, a person will generally start to see effects in 5 to 10 minutes and peak effects around 15 minutes. This high will then persist for another 15 to 45 minutes on average. And that pretty much sums up the extent of cocaine use, or at least builds a foundation to understand the drug. At its core, it's a stimulant that gives you more energy, increases your happiness, desire to socialize, and you talk a lot. Depending on who you ask, you will get different answers depending on the experience. Some like it, some hate it. So now let's think about what it could do for your muscle building endeavor. As we just told you that those in the past built the Incan Empire with coke, a pretty obvious assumption you may make is that it's going to help you with your squat and deadlifts. First off, it should come as no surprise that there aren't a ton of studies on the use of cocaine in sport. This is largely due to ethical concerns, as cocaine is illegal, making it very difficult to study, on people that is. As you'll see, there are a few relevant studies that have been performed on rodents which can give us an idea of how it might affect humans. However, there is also some other research that has been done on the physiological effects of cocaine, which can also give us a hint on what it would do in the gym. As pre-workout has become so popular in the fitness community, it should come as no surprise that lifters may be drawn to the increased arousal after doing some cocaine. This arousal also includes constricted blood vessels, dilated pupils, and increased body temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure. So let's first look at how traditional prep workouts function and if they're even beneficial. Pre-workouts are a family of supplements that are meant to be taken just before training to provide an increase in energy and mitigate fatigue. They're basically supposed to allow you to train harder and longer, resulting in a greater overall workload. There are numerous compounds that are often found in pre-workouts. However, the most common and effective compound by far is caffeine. While on the milder side, caffeine is similar to cocaine in that it too is a stimulant that acts on the central nervous system. Its stimulating effects act to enhance performance by increasing time to exhaustion, preserving muscle glycogen content, delaying perceptions of fatigue, and decreasing perceptions of pain and effort. In the past, it was believed that caffeine benefits were primarily isolated to endurance-related performance. In other words, maybe a person would have more energy lifting weights. It didn't necessarily result in strength or power gains. Well, that's what was believed. Newer research has shown that this initial belief is probably wrong, as research has now shown that supplementation with caffeine can also result in greater muscular strength and power. Further, as it increases time to fatigue, a trainee would theoretically be able to lift more weight for longer, resulting in greater overall workload. This would theoretically lead to gains in muscle mass and strength. So drink your coffee. Concerning the other compounds in pre-workout, the research shows their effectiveness are iffy at best, with some compounds showing more promise with others. But none of this matters right now, as caffeine is not only the most effective ingredient, it's also the most similar to cocaine. So while caffeine is a mild stimulant, it would make sense to conclude that a stronger stimulant would mean new PRs weekly. However, making the conclusion that cocaine is just strong caffeine is terribly misleading. For example, while it would seem as though this stimulation from cocaine would be good in the gym, it could actually lead to premature fatigue. Rodent studies have found that after using cocaine, it causes an increased acceleration in the degradation of glycogen in higher-dosed rodents, as well as increased accumulation of lactate in moderate to high-dosed rodents. Both of these result in premature fatigue of rodents in studies. In fact, there have been quite a few similar studies which have come to the same conclusion. We should say that this does appear to happen at higher doses of 12 to 20 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, at least in rodents. It's difficult to say how this would be extrapolated to human consumption. Still, this a larger concern for more endurance-related events compared to short-term bursts of high intensity, such as in weightlifting. One human study found that cocaine use can increase an individual's reaction time from a visual stimulus. Participants were administered cocaine, which resulted in significantly better reaction time over the course of 4 hours. Interestingly, it seemed as though their performance continually improved during this period. This improvement was accompanied by a feeling of less fatigue as well. However, this improvement in reaction was accompanied with a decrease in attention. Look, a squirrel type behavior. This could possibly cause a detriment to your time in the gym, as a proper training program requires a certain level of attention, especially during a set. If you're doing chest flies but things keep distracting you, you're not going to give 100% effort, and it could also mess up your mind-muscle connection or even lead to injury. Every exercise you do, even isolations, are going to activate other muscles. This can make feeling the intended muscle difficult if activation in the other muscle takes over. To combat this, a long-time hack used by bodybuilders is to simply concentrate on the muscle you want. This will help to further isolate it as well as get more muscle activation. This phenomena has been labeled mind-muscle connection and has shown to be a viable method for real results. The bottom line is that optimal training requires optimal attention. Doing cocaine is probably not going to do this for you and, in fact, will likely be a detriment. Use of cocaine can easily cause a user to become highly anxious and jittery if they use too much. In our opinion, this would make it very difficult to stay focused in the gym, and we can't imagine working out in that state would be ideal. Another study that appears to prove an increase in performance comes from mice in 2013. The goal of the test was to see if cocaine use would improve motor skills after administration. 2 groups of mice were made to perform on a rotorod. This is basically a dowel that rotates on which a mouse must walk on until they fall off. In the first phase, half were given cocaine and the other half were given saline for 6 days. In the second phase, half of the mice from each group switched, saline to cocaine or cocaine to saline. Researchers found that performance increased with the use of cocaine, but these improvements disappeared when cocaine was not administered. This led them to believe that there were performance improvements that were due to the psychomotor stimulation of cocaine and not the result of enhanced motor learning. But it's this rush that athletes are generally looking for. There is some evidence that shows it may provide some acute ergogenic benefit from its stimulation properties. In fact, other stimulants such as amphetamine have also shown to provide acute benefits, so this is not really too much of a surprise. We should also keep in mind that cocaine is classified as a S6 stimulant by WADA, the World Anti-Doping Agency. Along with being illegal, this is because WADA deems that cocaine has the potential to enhance performance. So in addition to its effects or no effects on performance, there are also other harmful side effects of cocaine use. One minor, yet a downside all the same, is that cocaine can cause breathing issues in the nose. As you are inhaling an abrasive substance, it can cause either a runny nose or even pain. Either of these aren't going to be beneficial in the weight room and could possibly even decrease the amount of work you can do. But what about the Incan workers? Well, it's important to remember that they were chewing the leaves, so they did not experience these problems. And no, we are not suggesting you chew on leaves instead. Other side effects that occur, usually after extended use, are loss of concentration, irritability, loss of memory, paranoia, loss of energy, anxiety, and a loss of interest in sex. Still, there are other real dangerous physiological effects when a person takes cocaine, like rhabdomyolysis. This is the same rhabdomyolysis that is often associated with CrossFit. Rhabdomyolysis is a condition when a muscle experiences heavy damage and begins to break down. This causes the muscle cells to burst, which releases myoglobin into the bloodstream. Excessive myoglobin can overwhelm the kidneys, resulting in buildup of waste products. It's a very serious condition that can be life-threatening or result in limb amputation. While relatively uncommon, one cause is extensive and high-intensity exercise. It also happens to be the most common form of kidney failure associated with cocaine use. Now it seems this is the result of long-term or heavy use rather than acute, but we wouldn't want to test it. There obviously aren't any studies that look to see if heavy training with cocaine would have a compounded effect on the development of rhabdomyolysis. However, it seems to make sense that there would be, and it shouldn't need to be said, but having your muscle disintegrate is not good for muscle growth. Not good at all. Another serious issue that can occur with long-term use is heart issues. Numerous studies have concluded that the abuse of cocaine can lead to numerous heart issues such as blockade of sodium and potassium channels, oxidative stress and mitochondrial damage, and disruption of cardiac excitation-contraction coupling. While you may not completely understand what this is, just understand that collectively, this leads to an increase in blood oxygen demand while decreasing heart oxygen supply. But that's not all. It's known that cocaine use is also responsible for the acceleration of apoptosis, which is the natural death of cells in the heart muscles of users. Over time, this leads to numerous heart conditions, including heart failure and ischemic myocardial infarction. Again, not good for muscle growth. Unfortunately, there have also been recorded deaths occurring after a user takes cocaine and then partakes in intense exercise. Other unwanted effects mentioned by athletes after use are perceptual misjudgments, time disorientation, and general ability to think quickly and make judgments. As you can see, the effects of cocaine are all over the place, just like your mind after snorting a line. The most basic summary seems to be that taking a little may provide some benefit due to the rush and excited stimulation. However, more use begins to cause a detriment to performance and mental state. There's also one other factor we need to consider if we were to seriously consider using cocaine as a pre-workout. There's a reason that cocaine is known as a rich man's drug. Unless you're making a ton of money, cocaine is going to make you broke in a few months. Pricing can obviously vary, but a gram of cocaine will probably cost around $50. Unless you're able to control your use, you're going to use the entire gram when you work out. This means you could easily spend $500 to $1,000 a month just on your pre-workout. However, that price is if you are magically able to only use cocaine for your workout. This likely won't happen. Cocaine is the second most used illegal drug in the world, and cocaine addiction is a major problem. What this means is that if you are using cocaine on a regular basis, you are going to use more than just for working out. In addition to more negative side effects, which we will discuss below, it's that much more money. You're not going to be able to afford your membership anymore or supplements that are awesome like creatine. In the beginning of the video, we told you that there's a very important relationship between cocaine and bodybuilding. And there is. However, it has nothing to do with building bigger muscles. In fact, it's not even about the effect that cocaine has on bodybuilding. Rather, it's about the effect that bodybuilding or any type of exercise has on cocaine use. If you start on a resistance training program, there's a good chance that you will start using less cocaine. That's right, resistance training may be a powerful tool to actually decrease use of cocaine. A study in 2017 showed this using rats. The study design was quite simple. There were two groups of rats, a sedentary group and a resistance training group. Both groups were hooked up to machines that allowed the self-administration of cocaine. The researchers then sat back and watched. They found that the resistance training group used cocaine significantly less times and with lower doses. Now, of course, this is in rats and not humans, but resistance training has actually played a large part in some substance abuse and recovery programs for some time. It's believed that the large dopamine release from resistance training plays a big role in this. At the same time, exercise can also activate your endocannabinoid system. This is the same system activated by smoking weed. Have you ever been on a run or an intense training session and hit a point where you start to feel good? You get more motivation, a little euphoria, more energy. That's likely your endocannabinoid system being activated. The main point being is that regular exercise can actually give you pleasure in the same way cocaine does. Plus, it's free. Well, maybe you need to pay a gym membership, but that's nothing, especially compared to the price of cocaine. So, the main question, is Coke a good workout? After looking at the evidence, we would say no, it's definitely not. Now, maybe if you used a small amount, you could get a somewhat beneficial high, but that's purely hypothetical, and you can get the same effects by taking a single caffeine pill that costs pennies. Using caffeine would also completely get rid of any chance of getting any type of addiction. In other words, there is absolutely no reason you should be trying cocaine to help fuel your workout session. Not only are there other options that can provide similar benefits, you're not going to get the slew of side effects: anxiety, lack of attention, running nose, rhabdomyolysis, heart disease, death. Side effects. Just stick to our favorite, a cup or two of coffee. Chick-fil-A is the most popular chicken sandwich in the USA. Year after year, it regularly comes out as the favorite chicken voted by consumers. And did you know it can also help pack on the muscle? Maybe, possibly. Or are we just trying to make ourselves feel better about eating fast food? Perhaps it's a little of both, because we love Chick-fil-A and we plan on continuing to eat there. Either way, in this video, we're going to break down the muscle-building potential of the Chick-fil-A fast food chain. We'll first determine what's needed to build muscle, how many calories are required, and what nutrients do you need. Once we know what we need, we can then research the nutrition of Chick-fil-A and determine if it delivers what your muscles need. Oh, and stick around as we're going to give you some great options on menu items you could choose to drive your growth. But first, let's get a little background on Chick-fil-A to find how its chicken sandwich has become so beloved across the country. Chick-fil-A was founded way back in 1946 by Samuel Truett Cathy. Originally, it was a fast food restaurant by the name of the Dwarf House and opened up in the Atlanta area. At this time in its infancy, it had a substantial menu, but its famous chicken sandwich hadn't been invented yet. It remained this way for 15 years until 1961, when a discovery would be made that changed the chicken sandwich game. Wanting to find an alternative to hamburgers, Cathay found a pressure fryer that was able to cook a chicken sandwich in the same time as hamburgers, and the result was delicious, and the rest was history. The restaurant slowly merged and expanded and became the Chick-fil-A we know today. At its birth, it was the first national chain to specialize in making a fast chicken sandwich, and this is how it's remained until today. Now you might equate a food being made fast as being not so tasty. You sacrifice some taste to save some time, but not Chick-fil-A. They are delicious and are routinely voted as best tasting. In fact, the primary negative complaint about Chick-fil-A has nothing to do with their food but the politics of the owner. But we won't travel down that road today. We just hope we never get to a point where we would have to boycott Chick-fil-A because we're not sure how long we could resist. Anyways, what started out as one delicious chicken sandwich evolved, and now the Chick-fil-A sandwich has grown into at least 6 types, including variations such as grilled and spicy. In addition to the chicken sandwiches, you can also dine on some salads, nuggets, or your typical sides such as fries. Over the years, Chick-fil-A has gained a reputation amongst bodybuilders, both recreational and pros. You can even find the likes of Kali Muscle chowing down. Its main draw is obviously their delicious chicken. In general, chicken is regarded as a healthier meat option than ground beef, especially the kind you may get from a fast food chain. When looking at the nutrition of different sources of meats, chicken breast is the most popular choice among lifters due to its high percentage of protein and low-fat content. At the same time, Chick-fil-A prides itself as using 100% natural whole breast meat, as well as not using any type of hormones or filler. This alone makes it very attractive for bodybuilders who are trying to get in as much protein as they can. Speaking of protein, let's dig a little deeper into what protein is and why it's so important for your muscle growth. Protein is one of your 3 macronutrients and is responsible for the repair and building of muscle. It's essentially a long chain of compounds known as amino acids, 20 to be exact. These amino acids all play various roles but are ultimately the building blocks of muscle. As such, you need to make sure you eat enough if you want big muscles. So how much protein do you need to eat? The RDA for protein is set at a measly 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight or 0.37 grams per pound of body weight. However, this number is set to give an adequate number for the majority of people on Earth to sustain a healthy life. However, bodybuilders and athletes aren't average individuals. Going to the gym and lifting weights 3 to 6 times a week causes a great deal of stress and damage that requires more protein, or at least if you want to build muscle. Therefore, the average number given for lifters is 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, or 0.73 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. This means a 200-pound man would need to eat about 200 grams of protein daily. When looking at a person's total calories, this usually comes out to being around 30%. Now, you're obviously not going to eat all these 200 grams of protein in one sitting. A basic guideline is to spread this protein out across the day in 4 to 6 servings, 3 to 4 hours apart. Ideally, these meals are of similar amounts of protein. Therefore, if you were trying to eat 200 grams in a day, each meal should contain about 30 to 50 grams of protein. In addition to protein, you're going to need a good amount of carbs to help fuel your workouts while also filling out your muscles with glycogen. If you want to maximize your muscle growth, this is not the time for low-carb diets. The good thing is that Chick-fil-A can provide plenty. Unlike protein, which has a much more specific intake, your carb intake can vary greatly. Not including low-carb diets, this will generally be anywhere from 50 to 60% of a bodybuilder's diet. Similar to your protein intake, your total carb consumption should be spread out across the day as well. The one meal that you may want to give some special attention to is your post-workout meals. After your workout, your muscles' glycogen levels have been completely diminished. Therefore, it's important to replenish these as fast as possible, so you'll want to eat some along with your protein. In the past, it was believed that you should eat a protein-to-carb ratio of 1 to 4. As your protein intake should be 30 grams of protein, your carbohydrate intake should be 120 grams. That's a lot. However, researchers now believe this can be lower, especially for recreational lifters. You may see the number go anywhere from a 1-to-1 ratio to a 1-to-3 ratio. This means that if you ate 30 grams of protein, you should eat somewhere between 30 and 90 grams of carbohydrates. So, does Chick-fil-A deliver? Could you build muscle while eating Chick-fil-A? Yes, absolutely. Putting all other nutritional concerns to the side for a minute, a meal at Chick-fil-A has plenty of protein and carbs to pack on muscle. You can easily reach your daily needs simply by eating the majority of their menu items. Many of their sandwiches have about 30 to 35 grams of protein. For example, their regular chicken sandwich packs 29 grams of protein and 420 calories. Assuming you were to only drink water and not use any of their sauces, you could theoretically only eat these to get in your protein and hit your calories. With that in mind, if your main source of protein is going to be Chick-fil-A, you will most likely be performing a dirty bulk. A dirty bulk is when a bodybuilder increases their calories significantly to promote faster muscle growth. Usually, a lifter is advised to eat a surplus of 300 to 500 calories, while 300 may be the optimal amount. This will be enough for muscle growth while not too much as to add a lot of fat. Under a dirty bulk, the lifter will eat significantly more than this. Most on a dirty bulk won't even watch their calories as long as they are eating enough protein. For this reason, we would recommend you not use Chick-fil-A as your only source of protein. Doing this could possibly bring about some nutritional deficiencies, but we will talk about this in a little bit. However, let's say you are trying to lose body fat or are trying to run a body recomposition. Are you still going to be able to eat at Chick-fil-A? Yep, Chick-fil-A has a couple of high-protein, low-calorie food choices, specifically the grilled Chick-fil-A nuggets. The nuggets pack a crazy 25 grams of protein per serving at just 130 calories. This comes out to being 77% of calories from protein. To be clear, this is basically what you can expect to get from some protein powders. Now, those are the most lean options on the menu, but there are some other good choices as well. Even the regular Chick-fil-A nuggets come in at 43% protein with 27 grams of protein at 250 calories. We just mentioned that Chick-fil-A has some nutritional concerns. At least if you're only planning on eating Chick-fil-A, we wanted to address those right now. Again, this is really only an issue if you plan on only eating Chick-fil-A. The first nutritional problem that screams out is the sodium intake, which is a common criticism of eating fast food. Most of the chicken sandwiches have extremely high sodium content of 1,400 milligrams or more. Given that the recommended sodium intake is only 2,300 milligrams, this is a ton. Just 2 sandwiches will put you well over the limit, at least according to the American Heart Association. We'll get into this a bit. Eating too much sodium can cause a number of negative health effects. It can cause you to hold on to water, cause high blood pressure, headaches, and lead to heart disease. However, research out of University of California, Davis has suggested a new theory concerning sodium intake. The study suggests that people will naturally seek out an appropriate amount of sodium as the brain will almost self-regulate. This means that maybe the concern about sodium may be exaggerated. Researchers monitored the sodium levels of individuals from over 45 countries for more than 50 years. Before we go further, realize that a lot has changed in 50 years. For example, the obesity levels of Western countries have skyrocketed, as well as various diseases such as diabetes. In addition, our diets have drastically morphed, as well as the rise of the fast food industry such as Chick-fil-A. At the same time, this study looked at 45 countries. These countries have drastically different diets and food sources. However, researchers found that sodium levels have remained constant for the entire period. This level is 2,622 to 4,830 milligrams per day. The bottom line is that the scare of high sodium may not necessarily be warranted if you have no underlying health conditions. Why is this so important? Well, because high sodium levels are often a major criticism of eating Chick-fil-A. Now, we're not saying sodium doesn't matter at all, but it's something to keep in mind. However, even if sodium isn't an issue, this isn't the only nutritional issue with Chick-fil-A. If you were to only eat Chick-fil-A, you would also be missing out on a lot of your essential micronutrients like vitamins and minerals. While not usually associated with muscle growth, a deficit could also affect your muscle function and muscle growth and overall health. This is why you want to eat a variety of food sources, especially including plenty of vegetables. Now, you could technically only eat Chick-fil-A sandwiches and hit your protein requirement while also eating an appropriate amount of calories. However, this would limit your food selection and leave no room for the addition of other choices. Okay, so maybe only eating Chick-fil-A isn't the best idea. The good thing is the solution is easy. Don't. Be sure to include plenty of other foods. But now let's go back to what you should eat at Chick-fil-A to build some massive muscles. One of the things we love at Chick-fil-A is that some items allow you to add a protein a la carte. This means you could instantly give your meal a protein boost of 21 grams at just 110 calories. If you're looking for a muscle-building dinner, add a side of grilled chicken nuggets to the market salad. Normally, this meal packs 550 calories with 28 grams of protein. By adding the nuggets, you're going to get 660 calories and 49 grams of protein. Due to the added almonds and salad, this is likely going to be your #1 muscle-building meal on the Chick-fil-A menu. It's high in protein, a decent selection of food sources, and low in calories. Now, what if we were to tell you that there's more to Chick-fil-A than just a dose of protein? You could also use Chick-fil-A to possibly improve your workout. While most bodybuilders think of Chick-fil-A as a post-workout meal, you could actually stop by for a pre-workout, especially if you train in the morning. Many will exaggerate the effects of training fasted and act like your muscles may just fall off. They won't under normal circumstances, however, it's still not optimal. Ideally, you can get a little bit of carbs and protein in your system to help fuel your workout, while providing the muscles with amino acids to mitigate muscle breakdown. However, eating too much can cause digestive issues for many people. So, what should you eat? One of our favorite pre-workout snacks is good Greek yogurt, like the Greek yogurt parfait at Chick-fil-A. Made with Greek yogurt, fresh berries, and granola, this treat packs 31 grams of carbs to fuel your muscles and 12 grams of protein to build them back up. But that's not it. Most people love a good pre-workout, and Chick-fil-A has our favorite, coffee. So obviously we're talking about the beautiful caffeine found in coffee. There's no need to spend a bunch of money on a fancy pre-workout, as we're going to tell you secret. The primary active ingredient in pre-workouts is simply caffeine. After examining multiple pre-workouts, research has concluded that caffeine is the most effective compound. Other ingredients may or not be beneficial, but don't come close to the value of caffeine. Caffeine is a mild stimulant that can help to mitigate time to fatigue, increase energy, decrease rate of perceived exertion. This just means workouts don't feel as hard, and that increases total workload. Newer research has even shown that it can increase strength and power output. Further, studies have shown that coffee works just as good as a caffeine pill, assuming the dosing is equal, so grab a cup or two before you hit the gym. So let's talk about your post-workout. Chick-fil-A has several great sandwiches and items that can help supply your body with carbs and protein. But before we get into that, let's first talk about some liquid calories. Chocolate milk. Yep, drinking some chocolate milk to have right after your training could be a great idea, and it's not just because it tastes good. And while it does have protein and carbs, there's still another awesome quality of it: hydration. Researchers have discovered that because of the consistency and compounds found in milk, it sits in your digestive tract longer than other liquids such as water. As a result, this allows your body to absorb more of the water that composes milk. This makes it an amazing hydration beverage. How amazing is it? Very amazing, even better than water. In fact, there are studies that even show drinking milk post-workout acts a better option for hydration than actual sports drink. Now with that in mind, we can also acknowledge that it also does have 7 grams of protein and 23 grams of carbs per serving as well. Of course, you'll need to increase that after training, but it's not a bad start. After your milk, it's really up to you on what food item you want, which would depend on your goal and caloric needs. If you're trying to make some lean gains, you can't go wrong with the grilled Chick-fil-A nuggets we talked about earlier. However, the grilled Chick-fil-A sandwich is also a great option with 390 calories and 29 grams of protein. Eating this with a serving of milk would easily put you at 35 plus grams of protein and 530 calories. This is definitely going to drive some muscle growth. Keep in mind that we have only gone over a few of the menu items from Chick-fil-A, while many others could do the trick as well. Regardless, it turns out that Chick-fil-A actually does have some muscle-building options. We definitely wouldn't suggest you only get your protein from Chick-fil-A, but it could definitely be an option once in a while. We also want to say that we are not suggesting this is the best option or healthiest, but we also believe in moderation. And so if you want to grab a Chick-fil-A sandwich after your Friday workout, you're going to be okay and can expect your body to be fully satisfied. To recap, we want to go over just a few guidelines on how to make the most out of a trip to Chick-fil-A. The first is to stay away from any of the liquids other than the milk, especially soda and diet soda. These are just empty calories and will do nothing good for you. You could maybe down some juice immediately after a post-workout, but milk is going to be your best option. Also, stay away from most of the sides, waffle fries, desserts, etc. However, there are some good options such as their fruit cup, yogurt parfait, and kale crunch side. There's also one side we want to specifically point out, the chicken tortilla soup. It brings 24 grams of protein at just 340 calories, making it an awesome snack or even a meal. Concerning the sandwiches, the best option for those on a cut will be the grilled chicken sandwich and the grilled nuggets. Or if you want to get some breakfast, check out their egg white grill. 300 calories and 28 grams of protein. All of these could essentially fit in a diet with a caloric deficit. Now, if you are on a bulk, the choices would depend on you and your caloric needs. Keep in mind to look at the salads and remember that you can add a side of grilled nuggets on top. For dressing, stick with the light Italian or light balsamic vinaigrette. Turns out that America's most beloved chicken sandwich makes a pretty awesome post-workout meal too. Have you ever heard how celery is a miracle food? That it'll actually make you burn more calories than it provides simply by digesting it? Basically, this implies that you will burn calories every time you eat celery. If you have, well, we wanted to tell you absolutely none of that is true. However, people want to believe it is because everyone's looking for that superfood to help them burn their fat. While we don't have any foods that'll melt fat off your bones on their own, there are some that can definitely help your journey, backed by science. This video will go over the foods you definitely need to have in your diet. In order to lose weight, you basically need to burn more calories than you eat. We know it's a bit more complicated than that, but that is the gist of it. This means that we gain weight from eating. So how could eating help us lose weight? That's because not all foods are created equal. If you've ever heard the saying, a calorie is a calorie, or any other suggestion that all calories are equal, know that it is not true. We live in a time where everything about food has been broken down to a single variable. How many calories does it have? Of course, calories are extremely important when you're trying to burn fat. However, food is just more than calories, as you'll see. Different foods pack drastically different nutrients, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and other compounds, which can have a significant effect on your body. So while the actual calories of a food are technically the same, the rest of the food can be drastically different, which can have an effect on weight loss. And with that in mind, we're going to start with an extremely important compound that is often looked over. While not technically food, this list would not be complete without mentioning water. So we're going to start with some good old H2O. Sure, it might be a boring food, but water can definitely help you lose weight. In fact, it can help you lose weight independent of diet and exercise. In other words, simply drinking more will help you shed the pounds. A study followed 173 premenopause women who were trying to lose weight for over a year. During this time, the women tracked their diet, water intake, fluid intake, and any exercise they performed. All of the data was then analyzed, so the researchers were able to specify the exact role that water played in any weight loss. The results showed that women who increased their water intake to just over 1 liter of water saw 2 kilograms of fat loss as a result. So to be clear, this 2 kilos of weight loss came solely from drinking water and was in addition to any weight loss from diet or other exercise. What's even more amazing is that similar results occurred in other studies as well. It's thought to be due to water requiring an increase in thermogenesis. It's estimated that every half-liter drink will burn 23 calories. Over the course of a year, this could add up considerably, especially when you consider all you need to do is drink water. However, there's more than one mechanism in drinking water that's believed to aid in fat loss. That is largely the satiety effect of water. That means that drinking water will help keep you feeling full and fight off cravings. Helping you fight off cravings and limiting your calorie intake is likely an even greater effect than the rise in metabolism, at least if you drink it at the right time. When is the right time? Let's look at what science says. A study followed a group of overweight participants who were trying to lose weight. Two groups were created during the study, with the only difference being that one group drank a glass of water before each meal. Other than that, everything else was equivalent. What kind of difference could a glass of water before your meal make? Pretty massive, as they lost a staggering 44% more weight than those who didn't. This might just be the easiest food on this list to incorporate into your daily diet. So now that you got your hydration down, let's get to your first food. Well, at least a group of food. For the next foods, we have one that's a little spicy. We're talking about cayenne peppers. Well, we're actually talking about capsaicin, which is the active ingredient in peppers that makes your mouth burn. However, capsaicin supplements are usually made from cayenne peppers, which is why there's a close association. So, as we were saying, if you've ever wondered why capsaicin burns, it's because it's actually a chemical irritant and a neurotoxin for humans to consume. That makes sense now. If you've ever stopped eating food because it was too spicy, well, the capsaicin's job was a success. But how does an irritant help lose fat anyway? It's probably in a similar manner as you're thinking. When you consume capsaicin, it triggers your TRPV1 receptor, which then releases heat into your body. This then leads to a higher caloric burn, approximately 50 calories a day. While there aren't a ton of studies on capsaicin's effects on weight loss, there are enough for there to be a meta-analysis. Published in 2023, this meta-analysis compares all of the studies on capsaicin's fat-burning effects. In total, 15 studies met the requirements put forth by the researchers and were included in the study. After full analysis, they discovered that capsaicin may have rather modest effects in reducing BMI, BW, and WC for overweight or obese individuals. At the same time, there's evidence that capsaicin can actually curb your appetite. We know that when we eat spicy food, our urge to eat is shrunk because it hurts. If you're sensitive to capsaicin, it'll likely reduce your appetite as well. And if it does, this can result in a significant account for an untold amount of calories. So how much should you eat? Well, we can't say for sure. However, we do know of one fat loss study which had participants eat 6 milligrams a day for 12 weeks. This dose led to significant amounts of fat loss, so that seems like a good spot to start. So now let's rewind to the beginning of the video, where we opened the video with the story of celery. We also said none of it was true. In reality, there is some truth in the gist of the explanation, and it all has to do with something that's called the thermal effect of food, or TEF for short. To understand TEF, we have to realize our bodies use energy to fuel every single process that occurs. This includes things such as respiration and our brain processing information. It also includes digestion. Like in the celery story, TEF is the amount of calories that's required to digest food, transport nutrients, and excrete it. So again, there are 3 macronutrients in our diets, and all 3 have different levels of TEF. One of them is significantly higher than the other 2. The macro with the lowest TEF is going to be fat. Fat is a highly concentrated form of energy, already broken down to its simplest components. Therefore, when you eat foods high in fat, it's very easy for your body to break it down. Ultimately, this means you aren't going to use a lot of energy to process it. Therefore, it has a TEF of 0 to 1%. That means if you ate 100 calories of fat, you only burn 1% of it to process it. The middle macro is carbohydrates. We can think of some carbohydrates such as fruit, rice, and oatmeal. They're a bit more solid and will require a bit more energy to break down. Therefore, carbohydrates have a TEF of around 10%. Again, eating 100 calories of carbohydrates would require 10 calories to process it. And then we have protein. Steak, chicken, pork, and other animal products. These foods are a bit tougher, so they require significantly more energy to break down. Therefore, protein has a TEF of 20 to 30%. Plant-based protein sources like legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains also contribute to the thermic effect of food, or TEF, but their TEF is generally lower than for animal-based proteins, ranging from 10 to 20%. Dr. Jose Antonio performed a famous study to examine the effects of an ultra-high-protein diet. He found that even though the high-protein group ate 800 calories more, they didn't gain any fat. While we're on protein, we need to discuss another benefit. We just talked about how protein is going to take the longer to digest. Well, this also means that it'll keep you feeling full for longer. In this manner, it can help curb appetites naturally. For these reasons, high-protein diets have been consistently found to be effective in weight loss studies. So what type of protein should you eat? In reality, any high-protein food will have this effect. However, eggs seem to pop up a lot in research. Eggs are consistently used in studies to show the weight loss benefits of high-protein diets. For example, a study from 2020 showed that simply adding eggs to breakfast resulted in an overall decrease of total calories, which ultimately meant more weight loss. Yogurt is another protein source that's actually been used in studies to promote weight loss. However, as we mentioned, any high-protein food would presumably work. For example, a study pitted lean beef against chicken as the main source of protein in the two groups of participants losing weight. After 12 weeks, both groups lost a significant amount of fat. However, there was no difference between the groups. In other words, they both lost similar amounts of weight. Next on the list are diets high in fiber, particularly soluble fiber. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate that your body cannot fully digest. In fact, there are two types of fiber, insoluble and soluble. Insoluble fiber does not break down in water and is responsible for adding bulk to your stool. This helps digestive health and can keep you regular. On the other hand, soluble fiber does dissolve in water. This creates a gel-like substance which can sit and fill up your stomach, making you feel full. In addition to filling you up, researchers have found that high-fiber diets may also help decrease weight through another mechanism, improving your gut flora. For example, different individuals will start with a different situation going on in their guts, some more ideal than others. Researchers have found that a high-fiber diet results in a greater overall improvement in those with a less than ideal gut. As a result, they tend to lose more weight. So what are some great high-fiber foods? Well, oats are a standout. Studies have constantly been found to have a positive effect on your weight, either to lose weight or with weight management. Oats is a type of soluble fiber, meaning it helps fill up your stomach. However, oats also have other weight loss benefits. One major benefit is the improvement of appetite hormones leptin and ghrelin. Oats can raise leptin, which encourages you to stop eating, while decreasing ghrelin, which usually increases appetite. Better yet, combine a high-fiber diet with a high-protein diet. Both of these increase satiety and fullness, so it can act as a double-edged sword in your fight against fat. What's interesting is that these two tactics can work so well that often followers of the diet don't even need to count calories. For example, a 2018 study had 34 participants follow a 12-week diet in which the only variable was to increase fiber intake and increase lean protein. Specifically, fiber was increased to more than 35 grams per day, while protein was increased to over 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. Again, even though there was no controlling of calories, participants still ate 265 calories less per day on average. We should note that 0.8 grams per kilogram is actually still a low amount of protein. This simply means that their protein levels were very low before the diet. Regardless, both of these diets, independently and combined, have seen consistent success in helping drop weight. Another group of foods that's shown to aid fat loss is a form of carbohydrate known as resistant starch. Starch is a complex carbohydrate called a polysaccharide, which is composed of a long chain of glucose molecules. It's commonly found in many vegetables and is especially connected to potatoes and rice. Now, resistant starch is a unique type of starch which, similar to fiber, passes through the small intestine undigested and reaches the colon intact. Once in the colon, it's fermented and feeds your gut flora. Again, this is similar to fiber, which can increase fat loss specifically because it improves your gut. At the same time, resistant starch has fewer calories than normal starch and other carbohydrates, 2 calories per gram versus 4. This allows you to eat more, yet fewer calories, which decreases total caloric intake while increasing satiety. There are several common foods which contain resistant starch, such as cashews, raw oats, and green bananas. One of the more common sources is a bit of a hack. You can cook potatoes and let them cool before you eat. This heating and cooling process causes an alteration which produces resistant starch. For the next food, we're going to give you another liquid to drink to wash down all that protein and resistant starch: green tea. Green tea is an immensely popular beverage in the East and is slowly gaining traction in the West. Not only do drinkers enjoy the taste, there's one very special ingredient that can make it a great tool to fight excess weight gain: caffeine. Caffeine is the world's most popular stimulant and has proven to be a powerful tool for fat burning. Due to its stimulating effects, it's been suggested that caffeine can increase our metabolism. Again, our metabolism refers to a group of systems that dictate how many calories we burn on a daily basis. When consumed on a daily basis, it's estimated that green tea can burn up to an extra 100 calories per day. That's a lot for simply changing your hydration source. In addition to burning calories, several other health benefits have been attached to green tea. Perhaps the most significant is that green tea is full of catechins. Catechins are a group of flavonoids which hold high antioxidant properties. In fact, catechins are believed to be such powerful antioxidants that they're said to be effective in actually preventing various cancers, such as lung cancer, breast cancer, esophageal cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer, and prostate cancer. The rate of suggested consumption needs considerable research, but 3 to 5 cups per day is a common suggestion. In addition to foods that you should eat to lose fat, we wanted to also give you a few bonuses. Some foods you shouldn't eat. The first group of foods is going to be high-caloric liquids. As mentioned above, one of the variables that affects a food's ability to lose weight is its satiety rate, how full it makes you. Unfortunately, liquid is minimal relative to its total calories. This is one of the reasons it's advised not to drink fruit juice. When you do, you consume all the sugar and calories but don't get any of the nutrients from the meat of the fruit nor the satiety effects. Studies have actually shown that when caloric-yielding liquids are consumed with meals instead of water, it greatly increases the risk of eating in a surplus. So you now know what food should be seen in your diet? Here are some tips to integrate it into your diet. As we mentioned in the middle of the video, perhaps the most influential change to your diet should be to increase your protein. When losing weight, you should eat at least 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. A couple of studies have shown that eating even a higher amount could result in more weight loss. If you're not used to eating higher amounts of protein, you'll likely be surprised at how much just 2 grams per kilogram is, and you'll likely find you become very full very fast. However, as you continue, you can adjust as necessary. In terms of fiber, men should try to eat at least 35 grams per day, while women should aim to eat at least 25 grams per day. Also, be sure to include some resistant starch in your diet. Raw oats, green bananas, cashews, or cooled potatoes work great. You can find some recipes for these foods to put into your daily food. And with all that food, don't forget to hydrate throughout the day as well. Remember how big of an impact drinking plenty of water daily can have on your body composition. In order to drink the correct amount, we're also going to suggest drinking green tea. Further, we'll include the tip on what not to eat, or more specifically what not to drink, basically any fluid with calories. So daily, you should drink at least 64 fluid ounces of liquid. Your other fluid will come through the food you eat. However, everyone is different and requires a different amount, so start with that number and you can make alterations as necessary. Earlier we said that to get the most out of your green tea, you could try drinking 3 to 5 cups per day, which equals 24 to 40 ounces. That takes up a large chunk of your daily hydration, which should then be filled up with water, another 24 to 40 ounces. However, keep in mind that number is used for all individuals. Therefore, if you exercise, this will likely be much more. If that's you, keep your green tea consumption the same and increase your total hydration with water. Other than water or green tea, milk would be another acceptable liquid. Even though it is liquid, it is a thicker consistency and it packs a ton of nutrition. Further, an extra bonus, milk has been shown to be an awesome hydrator, perhaps better than water or even a sports drink. At the same time, be sure to drink a cup of water before every meal. Remember, this can make a huge dent in your total calories consumed. And if you're trying to add some flavor to your foods, be sure to use capsaicin in your recipes. Again, 6 milligrams a day is a good number to start with, and go from there. So, we went over the foods to include in your diet to help you lose weight. However, while some of them can be highly effective, none of them come close to the magical celery that's talked about so much. In other words, none of these foods or food tips will completely mitigate the need to watch your caloric intake. Your fat loss will still come from getting into a caloric deficit and upping your activity level. These foods may just make that much easier to do. Have you heard of creatine? Of course you have. At least you have if you listen to our channel for any length of time. The reason we talk about it so much is because we love it, and it's essentially the most effective supplement on the market, or so we say. We decided it's time to give creatine its own video, dig into the finer details of this amazing compound, and answer the big question, does creatine actually build muscle? While it's only come to be popular among athletes since the 1990s, creatine has been around for much longer. Much longer. In fact, creatine was first discovered way back in 1832 by the French philosopher and scientist Michel Eugène Chevreul. From there, it went through a long process of discoveries building off one another. For example, in 1847, the German chemist Justus von Liebig discovered that wild animals have more creatine in their muscles than their domestic cousins. This led to the conclusion that the levels of activity influenced the amount of creatine produced. So even 180 years ago, we knew creatine had an important relationship to physical activity. Supplementation was then found to increase creatine stores in animals in 1912 and eventually used for humans the first time in 1926. By the 1950s, it was clear that supplementation definitely had a positive effect on the human body. Then in the 1990s, athletes learned that they could get a competitive edge by taking creatine, and it's estimated that 80% of the athletes in the 1996 Atlanta Olympics supplemented with it. From there, its popularity and effectiveness have only grown. It's now one of the very few supplements that the majority of experts say athletes and lifters should use. With that said, we want to ask you, have you ever actually looked at the studies behind its use? Or have you ever heard a more detailed explanation of what exactly creatine is, or why we even supplement with it? Well, you're going to now. The rest of this video is dedicated to the inner workings of creatine, so you can know the mechanisms behind the emergence of creatine as the most effective supplement on the market. In order to fully comprehend why creatine works in building muscle, notice we said why, not if it works, you need to know how it works. Understanding the mechanism is paramount to understanding its effectiveness. There's quite a bit going on, but trust us, once you fully understand it, you'll have no question if it builds muscle. Let's dig in. So the first thing you need to understand is that creatine is not a steroid or anything like that. In fact, it's not even a foreign substance. Right now, you and every single person has creatine in their body. In fact, if you didn't, you wouldn't be able to function at all. We'll get into that later, so let's move on with how it works. As we now know, creatine isn't a steroid, so what is it? Well, it's a non-proteinogenic amino acid, an amino acid that's not used in the formation of protein. While it's not used to form protein, it still has very special duties, as you'll soon see, but we'll tell you it has to do with building muscle. Due to its physiological role, the body will collect creatine in its natural stores through one of two pathways. The first pathway is through our diet. Creatine is only found in animal products, primarily red meat and fish. If you're an omnivore, meaning you eat meat and plants, about 50% of your stores will be collected this way through your diet. So what about vegans? Well, vegans will typically have significantly lower stores than meat eaters, as they're stuck with only the second pathway to fill their stores, the internal synthesis of creatine from the amino acids methionine, glycine, and arginine in the liver. Regardless, either from your diet or internal synthesis, creatine is then transported to your stores within your body. About 95% is stored in your muscles, with the remaining 5% being stored in the brain and testes. However, before it's stored, creatine goes through a reaction that adds a phosphate molecule, changing it into a compound known as phosphocreatine. It's this addition of the phosphate that makes creatine so important. Before we go further, we need to talk about another compound, adenosine triphosphate, or ATP for short. ATP is known as your body's energy currency. It's responsible for providing energy for every single muscle contraction. As its name implies, adenosine triphosphate contains 3 phosphate compounds. When energy is required, one of these phosphate molecules will break off, which releases energy that can be used for muscle contraction. The problem here is that you have a finite amount of ATP, and every time an ATP molecule loses a phosphate to provide energy, it leaves a compound known as ADP, or adenosine diphosphate. The di indicates that it now only has 2 phosphate groups, so now it's not capable of providing energy. Remember what we said about a phosphate group being added to creatine? Well, you can probably guess why that's important now. When energy is required fast, the phosphate group from the phosphocreatine breaks off, and it will donate it to a molecule of ADP, thus creating another molecule of ATP. Here, we need to note that this process specifically happens to provide energy for high-intense anaerobic events, such as lifting weights and sprinting. When it comes to aerobic training, there are other mechanisms to resynthesize ATP which are beyond the scope of this video. So in short, when energy is needed fast, the stored phosphocreatine is used to supply a phosphate molecule to ADP to form ATP, which can then be used for energy. The thing is, just like our ATP, our creatine stores are also finite. Think of it like a gas tank. Depending on your diet, the average person's creatine stores are only 60 to 80% full. When creatine is used, this level drops, thus limiting your body's ability to continue performing high-intense events and forcing your body to slow down. And so, we have now arrived at why we supplement with creatine. By taking a creatine supplement, we're able to fill up our creatine stores to 100%. Having full creatine stores then allows us to perform more work in the gym. This equates to performing a couple more reps or the ability to add a little more weight. It basically allows us to increase our work volume. Now imagine if you could go to the gym and add 5 to 10 kilograms to your lifts, or add a couple reps to all your lifts. What would happen? You'd get bigger and stronger. So it's this extra work that full creatine stores allow by way of greater energy that is then translated into more muscle, greater strength gains, and improvements in general athletic performance. Dr. Richard Kreider, the leading expert on creatine supplementation, summarizes the benefits of creatine supplementation, saying you can see the following benefits. Quote, improve maximal power and strength 5 to 15%, work performed during sets of maximal effort muscle contractions 5 to 15%, single effort sprint performance 1 to 5%, and work performed during repetitive sprint performance 5 to 15%. So, in a nutshell, creatine works by providing the body with a greater ability to synthesize more fuel to perform more work, which translates into greater adaptations. Simple and effective. As you can see, creatine supplementation works because creatine works. It's like saying that filling up your gas tank before taking a drive will allow you to drive further. There's no debate, it just does. While we could stop there are actually more mechanisms by which creatine works. For example, it's been found that creatine supplementation can improve satellite cell signaling. Satellite cells are a type of specialized stem cell located on the periphery of muscle fibers, which is what gives them their names. Studies have shown that they play a key role in the growth, repair, and regeneration of skeletal muscle. Therefore, satellite cell signaling simply refers to an increase in the capability to communicate with each other, which in turn leads to better muscle recovery and growth. As creatine improves this signaling, the body's able to synthesize muscle more efficiently. In addition, creatine also increases cell hydration. Now, this one needs explanation, as a common criticism is that creatine makes you gain water weight. In truth, it does. However, this is actually a good thing. Let's keep in mind that your muscles are 75% water. What this means is that a bigger muscle is obviously going to hold more water. While there might be some water retention in the first week or so, in the long term, as your muscles grow, water retention is evened out in proportion to your muscle gain. This review from 2022 sums it up by saying, while there is some evidence to suggest that creatine supplementation increases water retention, primarily attributed to increases in intercellular volume, over the short term, there are several other studies suggesting it does not alter total body water, intra or extracellular, relative to muscle mass over long periods of time. More importantly, a hydrated cell is more anabolic. The exact mechanisms aren't fully understood, but researchers know the swelling of a cell signals anabolic growth. Therefore, creatine increases the hydration of the muscles, which then creates a more anabolic environment, which means bigger muscles. Yet another mechanism, creatine has also been found to be responsible for lowering myostatin levels. Myostatin is a protein that's in charge of regulating muscle growth, specifically by inhibiting it. In other words, having higher myostatin levels means less ability to grow muscle. However, as creatine lowers myostatin levels, it increases your body's ability to grow muscle. And we're not done yet. There's also evidence that creatine reduces protein breakdown as well as increasing the anabolic hormone IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor. Now, let's look closer at what all this means for you. For starters, creatine supplementation can improve your recovery. If you're a regular viewer of our channel, you'll know how often we speak about the importance of recovery, as it's one of the primary indicators of how much work you can do. If you can recover faster, you can do more work and see better results. Creatine does improve recovery, which actually happens through several mechanisms. After intense exercise, your body's glycogen stores will largely be depleted. In order to recover faster, it's imperative for you to restore these levels ASAP, and this is what creatine does. When taken with large amounts of carbohydrates, 50 to 90 grams, creatine will cause a better absorption of glucose. At the same time, it'll help maintain muscle glycogen levels during exercise. This is also one of the mechanisms by which creatine can help maintain performance levels during the initial phases of high-volume training, especially when compared to no supplementation. This allows you to perform more work, which again means more muscle. Working in unison with this is the fact that creatine also has been shown to decrease inflammatory markers. All of these work together to improve the recovery of athletes so they can work more. Another awesome benefit, especially for those who train in warm climates, is that it helps increase the tolerance to heat. Actually, this is another benefit that comes by way of the extra cell swelling. The extra hydration reduces the body's thermoregulatory and cardiovascular responses. For example, those who supplement with creatine while training in heat experience a lower sweat rate and lower internal temperatures. Still, these benefits can be seen to some degree in anybody who trains with high intensity. If you get hot while training, creatine can help. So now that you understand how it works and more of its mechanisms, we can take a closer look at what type of effect it has on the body. Probably the main reason people take creatine is to increase muscle mass. Interestingly, one of the older studies from 1999 has some of the most impressive results. It showed that when combined with a resistance training program, muscle fibers see 2 to 3 times more growth than without. Since then, we've had a plethora of new studies. After long-term supplementation, the average creatine user still gains about twice as much muscle mass when compared to non-users. This equates to an extra 2 to 4 kilograms. And to be clear, this is lean body mass, not just weight gain. It's pretty clear why this is. When we look at muscle hypertrophy, the greatest indicator of muscle growth is an increase in total volume. In fact, there is a clear dose response. As creatine allows more work, you can perform more volume and see more muscle growth. Due to its mechanisms, creatine is also highly effective at increasing strength, power, and general performance variables. In terms of strength, you can expect to see results pretty quickly, like in less than 2 weeks. Some users will see an added increase of 15% in their strength, while the average can expect to see an increase of 8%. We should note these gains seem to improve intermittent types of activities. As you're likely planning on using creatine for longer than 2 weeks, let's look at the long-term effects. First, in contrast to short-term, taking creatine long-term seems to allow a trainee to increase their overall work capacity through an extended period of time. The strength seems to include both maximal strength values and muscle endurance. For example, a group of powerlifters saw a significant increase in their 3-repetition maximum or 3RM bench press. The control group still saw significant increases in their 3RM by 2.5 kilograms. However, the creatine group saw an increase of 8.9 kilograms. In addition, the creatine group saw a 37% increase in maximum repetitions of 85% of their 3RM, while the control didn't even see a significant change. In another study, 19 resistance-trained men followed a 12-week training program, with half using creatine supplementation. At the end of the study, the creatine group saw a significantly greater increase across numerous tests. For example, they saw a greater increase in bench press of 24% versus 16%, as well as squats of 32% versus 24%. It was also found that the creatine group saw a greater increase in the cross-sectional areas of type 1 muscle fibers, 35% versus 11%, type 2A muscle fibers, 36% versus 15%, and type 2AB, 35 versus 6%. At the same time, they also saw a greater increase in total gains of lean muscle mass, 6.3% versus 3.1%. We could go on, as the vast majority of studies on creatine see similar results. You should also understand that these increased adaptations transfer into an increase in actual athletic performance. To date, creatine has been tested on a plethora of athletes competing in very different sports. This includes resistance training, elite soccer training, canoe basic training, and plyometric training. Performance in all of these sports saw significant improvements. In terms of widespread consensus that creatine is an effective ergogenic aid, the ISSN, or International Society of Sports Nutrition, reports. Thus, a widespread consensus now exists in the scientific community that creatine supplementation can serve as an effective nutritional ergogenic aid that may benefit athletes involved in numerous sports as well as individuals involved in exercise training. But what about that one guy who said it actually doesn't work because he used it with no gains? Well, even though creatine is highly effective, there are such people as non-responders. These are people who see no benefits to creatine supplementation. The most likely cause of this is that their stores are already full due to their diet. Therefore, any extra supplementation is not absorbed as the stores are already full. The good news is that approximately 80% of people will see significant increases in creatine stores that are greater than 10%. Then 6.6% are quasi-responders, which means they'll see an increase of 5 to 10% in their stores. The remaining 13.4% are non-responders, meaning they see less than 5% improvement. So there is an 80% chance you're going to see some awesome results. As you can easily get a month's supply for less than $20, it is very worth your while. So now we know that creatine works for the large majority of people. We're going to show you how to use creatine most effectively. Now remember when we talked about what taking creatine as a supplement ultimately does. It fills our body's creatine stores. This takes time to do. You can simply do this by taking a normal dose, which is 3 to 5 grams a day. However, this can take up to a whole month. Therefore, the most common practice is to perform a loading phase. A loading phase is 5 to 7 consecutive days in which you take 20 to 25 grams of creatine throughout your day. This will fill up your stores quickly. From there, you can then simply take a maintenance dose of 3 to 5 grams a day. Now, let's get back to your loading phase. Some people might claim gastric distress or other discomfort when taking so much. However, it's usually exacerbated when taking bigger loads. Therefore, you can break the 20 to 25 grams into as small a serving as you want throughout the day. In fact, you can do this for your maintenance dose as well if needed. As far as creatine timing, it doesn't really matter when you take creatine. A meta-analysis from 2018 suggests that taking creatine immediately after training may produce larger gains in muscle mass. However, subsequent studies report there is no clear time that produce greater benefits. With that said, we do think that taking creatine post-workout may be a good idea. This mainly comes down to the recovery aspect. Remember that taking creatine with carbs and protein can enhance the absorption of muscle glycogen. As many of you are already making a protein shake, it just makes sense to go ahead and dump a serving of creatine in as well. Now let's talk about different versions of creatine. The original type of creatine to hit the market was creatine monohydrate. At the same time, this is the type of creatine the vast amount of studies that report positive results used. However, as creatine has gained more and more attention over the years in the general population, it's become a big seller. As a result, different variations have been produced, all of which claim to be superior to creatine monohydrate. Generally, that it's better absorbed. This includes creatine ethyl ester, creatine hydrochloride, and buffered creatine. They also come with a higher price tag. The problem is that as of today, there's only been a small number of studies directly comparing these to creatine monohydrate, and those that have aren't impressive at all. The majority show no significant benefit. In fact, some studies even show that monohydrate actually results in greater changes in muscle creatine content. With that said, getting a quality creatine monohydrate or micronized creatine monohydrate is all you need. With all that in mind, creatine is now being studied for its benefits that reach much farther than just improving performance in the gym. Creatine has been found to mitigate muscle atrophy from immobilization or sarcopenia in the elderly. It's also been found to be a powerful neuroprotector and can improve cognition. And we're even looking at possible benefits for brain concussions. In fact, the list goes on and will likely continue to grow. This is why we say when it comes to creatine, if you're not taking it, you're missing out. Creatine is by far the most studied and most effective supplement on the market, and there is really no comparison. There's also very little, if any, debate. Due to its vast range of uses, just about everyone, lifters and non-lifters alike, can see some benefits from taking creatine. It can be a family affair, but in all seriousness, if you're interested in lifting and fitness, which you obviously are, we would strongly recommend you give creatine a go, especially as you now know how amazing it is. Weight loss suits, fasting, and pills, oh my! Losing weight might just be the most convoluted topic in the world of fitness. There are so many myths, misunderstandings, and downright lies that plague people's understanding of weight loss to the point many have no understanding at all. This video is going to make some sense of it all. These are the 50 biggest weight loss myths. We're going to start this video with a big one. The first myth on this list is a calorie is a calorie. This phrase leads people to think that it doesn't matter where a calorie comes from, as all calories are equal. This is a very simplified explanation. It fails to acknowledge the other nutrients that come along with the calorie. Is a calorie from beer the same as a calorie from salmon? Does it provide vitamins and minerals or just a crazy insulin spike? Will it keep you full, or will you be hungry again minutes after you eat? Where you get your calories matters, so pay attention. For example, you can get calories from protein. Myth number 2 is more like part 2 to number 1, but it's going to talk about something really cool that happens with protein. When we eat food, our body uses energy to digest it, absorb it, transport its nutrients, and dispose of it. This is known as the thermal effect of food, or TEF. Out of protein, fat, and carbs, protein has the highest TEF of 20 to 30%. That means if you ate 100 calories, you'd use just 20 to 30 processing it. So yes, not all calories are equal. Speaking of protein, here's another myth. Myth number 3. You can't get fat from protein. We're not even sure where this idea came from, but it's more common than you might think. The idea that protein can't be stored as fat. Well, it's true that protein itself can't be stored as fat. Your body is incredibly efficient. Any excess protein consumed will first be converted into fat and then stored. For myth number 4, let's talk about the marketing industry. Have you heard the 10,000 steps rule? Well, that's just a marketing ploy. If you ever wondered where this number came from, here it is. In 1965, a Japanese company produced a step counter and named it Manpo Kai, which translates to 10,000 steps meter. That's it. It's a marketing ploy. In reality, this definitely isn't bad advice, as your daily activity to lose weight is a powerful tool and everyone should pay attention. However, the good news is the goal number is likely lower, anywhere from 4,400 to 7,500 steps. At that same time, more is definitely better, so while 10,000 steps is simply a marketing tool, it's actually a benefit to you. This is the only good myth on the list. Another marketing tool that's going to take your money is supplements. The number 5 myth is anything that promotes a pill as a secret to weight loss. Your quote secret to weight loss is not in a pill. While there may be some out there that slightly increase metabolism or promote fat burn, in the grand scheme of things, this will make a small dent in your overall weight loss journey. We're not saying to not utilize these, but be sure to keep them in their proper role. Speaking of burning fat, the number 6 weight loss fact is that burning fat equals losing fat. This confusion also has sometimes been used in marketing. For example, they might say a supplement increases your fat burn, suggesting this means you're going to lose fat. However, while caffeine is burning fat, it also leaves more carbs to burn later. Your body is always burning fat for energy along with using carbs. However, even when it's burning fat, you might still be gaining weight. Losing fat occurs when you burn fat but also get into a caloric deficit, so that it's not refilled. For number 7, we'll address a long-standing tip. This one has been around forever and is still shared regularly. We're talking about don't eat food after 6 p.m. This tip tries to suggest that eating foods late at night results in greater fat gain, usually explained by your metabolism being slower. In reality, the timing of your eating doesn't really matter so much, assuming your calories are the same. In other words, eating 3,000 calories in the morning will have the same effect as eating 3,000 calories in the evening. However, there is some nuance to this. For number 8, it's also a myth to say it doesn't matter when you eat. Hardly anything in the world of fitness and nutrition occurs in absolutes. We just went over your total calories is what matters in terms of gaining weight. However, this doesn't always mean timing doesn't make a difference. In reality, don't eat after 6 has been a useful tool for some people in losing weight. However, it's not because of your metabolism, so it still comes down to total calories. However, the worst of our diets occur in the late hours, pizza, shakes, etc. No one raids the kitchen at 10 p.m. for grilled salmon. Therefore, stopping at 6 p.m. does eliminate a lot of the excessive calories. Next, let's knock out some more bad advice. Myth number 9 usually sounds like, HIIT is better than steady state for losing fat or something of that nature. To clarify, HIIT refers to high-intensity interval training, which includes performing intervals of maximal intensity interspersed with intervals of recovery. Steady state refers to performing cardio at a consistent, moderate speed for a prolonged period of time, basically a treadmill workout. HIIT came onto the scene a few years ago and was hailed as being so much better for fat loss. In reality, both steady state and HIIT are good tools to use for weight loss, and they work equally as well, with time efficiency being the only real variable favoring HIIT. We're now in the double digits, so we'll give you another big one. The number 10 myth is that walking is the best way to lose weight. To be clear, we think cardio is great and everyone should include it in their training. We just went over the 10,000 step belief. However, if you can only pick one of the methods of training, we believe that lifting weights is a better tool. Lifting weights is still going to burn calories, but it'll also help maintain muscle and strength during your fat loss journey. If all you do is walk or some other form of cardio, you don't get this benefit. Now, obviously, the best option is to do walking with your weight training. For that reason, we want to talk about myth 11, which is more of a misunderstanding, and that's people severely underestimate the impact of walking. Many people falsely believe that your training must be intense to be effective for weight loss, and that's a problem. Going on a daily 30 to 60-minute walk can make a huge impact on your overall weight loss journey. The important takeaway is not to underestimate the impact that simply moving will play in your weight loss journey. Now let's talk about another misunderstanding. Number 12 is another myth, plain and simple. It states that your metabolism drops after the age of 30. While that claim has some truth to it, but it is terribly misleading. This claim is usually made with the implication that it's simply biological and there's nothing we can do about it. In reality, while a person's metabolism does tend to drop after 30, it's not biology, rather it's caused by our behavior. After 30, we tend to stop being as active as our younger years and our diet usually declines. This combination of poor food choices and living a sedentary lifestyle is what leads to the drop. If people stay active and eat healthy their whole life, our metabolism is steady until about the age of 60. Therefore, don't accept this fate. Staying active is the best thing you can do for your longevity and increasing the quality of your life. Going back to another straight-up lie, myth 13 are body type fat loss programs. Technically known as somatotypes, body type fat loss programs claim to be the ideal program for your body type. Ectomorphs who are tall and slim, mesomorphs who are athletic, and endomorphs who are shorter and fatter. Interestingly, these body types were created to identify the possibility of physical characteristics being linked to personality traits. For example, endomorphs are supposed to be friendly and outgoing. So none of this is true, and none of it has any link to weight loss. As we're talking about practices with little connection to science, let's talk about your BMI for number 14. Now, BMI isn't as outlandish as somatotypes, as there is some legitimate use to it, just not how it's used today. You see, BMI was created in the 1830s by Adolphe Quetelet, a Belgian mathematician and sociologist. It was created as a quick assessment tool to track trends in populations, not individuals. Adolphe needed an easy way to assess the fitness level of an entire town's population. However, he even specifically stated it was not a good assessment to make a definitive decision on the health of an individual person. This is because there are a ton of variables that aren't accounted for, such as water weight, percentage of muscle or fat, bone size, and others. Again, it was a tool to measure people in an entire town. Yet another common teaching that can lead people astray is number 15. We're talking about the idea that nutrition is 80% while your training is 20%. While we understand the general idea of the saying, it's not really true. This is trying to emphasize the importance of nutrition for your health, which is definitely not a bad thing. However, it pits nutrition and training against each other, when in reality they complement each other and work best when they're both optimized. Both your nutrition and training should be 100%. If either of them are off, your results will suffer. For number 16, let's talk about muscle for a little bit. Specifically, how many or how few calories a pound of muscle burns. You've probably heard of the importance of building muscle while you lose weight, as muscle will burn more calories. While there are a lot of awesome reasons you should lift weights while losing fat, burning calories isn't one. It is true that muscle will burn more calories, however, it's not a ton, as this claim seems to imply. 1 pound of muscle burns an extra 5 to 6 calories per day. If you figure you might put on 20 to 25 pounds in your first year, you can expect to burn an extra 100 calories after 365 days of training. Of course, 100 calories is 100 calories, however, you have plenty of other stuff to get excited about with lifting. Speaking of exaggerations, number 17 is going to give the real deal with EPOC. EPOC is one of the latest buzzwords that stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. This refers to the amount of work done by your body once you stop exercising to bring your body system back to homeostasis. Once you stop exercising, the body continues to require oxygen at an elevated rate to repair tissue, replenish energy sources, and remove metabolic byproducts generated during the exercise, such as lactic acid. So EPOC is real, but it's been marketed as if it's the most important part of the workout. It's not. Studies show that the total calories you burn with EPOC is equal to about 6 to 15% of the total calories burned during exercise. So yes, it does exist, but still to a very small effect, making it hardly worth it to choose workout solely upon it. Another exaggeration? Number 18 deals with fast weight loss. Really anything with fast weight loss. Seems as though every ad for weight loss has to do with instant weight loss, 30 pounds in 30 days. We can't comment on all of these, but the results are far from normal, assuming they're even true. However, if they are real, they're still occurring way too fast. If you were to go to any traditional nutritionist, they'd recommend you get an extra 300 to 500 caloric deficit daily. However, 1 pound of fat requires approximately 3,500 calories to burn. This means that it would take you a minimum of 1 week to burn 1 pound of fat, or 4 pounds a month. Even this number might be too high in the long term, meaning that losing fat even slower might be ideal. This slow rate of fat loss will help mitigate the possibility of muscle loss, as the body will not be in such of a need for energy. For the next myth, we want to tackle another misconception. The number 19 myth is the relationship between sweating and fat loss. These two are often attached to each other as if there's a direct relationship. That means that people believe that sweating a lot means they're burning calories. That isn't necessarily the case. Sweating occurs as a mechanism to help keep you cool when your core temperature rises. On the other hand, calories burned relates to the amount of work one does. While more work can increase your body's temperature, that's just one mechanism that controls temperature and does not control your sweat. For example, a person can lose more calories running a marathon during the winter in Canada, yet sweat more walking around Miami Beach in the summer. Further, people have different sweat rates and thresholds, meaning two people will have very different amounts of sweat in the same scenario. This simply means stop assessing how good a session was based on how much you sweat. We made it to number 20, so we're going to address another big, false belief. Working out while fasted is better for fat loss. This is connected to number 6. Burning fat is not the same as losing fat. When you train fasted, you'll break down more fat during that session for fuel. However, you will only lose fat if you stay in a caloric deficit. Let's say you burned 300 calories while fasting and it all came from fat. That's great. But once you eat your next meal, you're going to have an extra 300 calories that won't be burned as your exercise is already done. So if you eat 300 calories before training, you'll burn those calories. If you train first, you'll burn 300 calories from fat, but then you'll hold on to 300 calories the next time you eat. Again, it all evens out in the long run. Calorie control is always and will always be the primary mechanism of weight loss. Another important lesson you need to know is that weight loss is not constant. Number 21 is the myth that losing fat is linear. Too many people believe that once they start dieting and training, their weight loss is going to be a linear process. In other words, they believe their weight loss will be a constant process with no bumps. In reality, weight loss will look like the stock market. You'll have times of weight loss, times of extreme weight loss, plateaus, and even gains. What's important is the total sum in the long term. As long as the trend is a drop in fat, you are succeeding. This is important to know so that you don't get disappointed. Yet another misconception that can be demotivating is the weight scale. Number 22 is more of a statement and says to stop weighing yourself every day. As weight loss isn't consistent, weighing yourself every day can be discouraging if you're on a gain. There are so many factors to weight loss that your weight will fluctuate daily. You will gain weight and lose weight even if you do everything correctly. In addition, there are other things to judge other than your weight to see progress. Besides, we promise it doesn't matter how often you look at the scale, it will not help you lose weight faster. In fact, number 23 will deal with another issue with scales. Stop using the scale as your only variable for measurement. The only thing the weight scale tells you is how much you weigh at that exact moment. This includes fat, muscle, and bone. It also measures things that vary all the time, such as the amount of food in your stomach, water, urine, and a whole host of other variables. Women deal with bloating every month. So while the scale is useful, you should judge your fat loss journey with your scale number compared against other variables. We actually have 4: how you look in the mirror, how your clothes are fitting, how your performance is, and your general state of energy. For example, if the scale is up but your clothes are loose, you like what you see in the mirror, your training is improving, and you feel great, then don't change anything. When you use all those variables, you'll get a much better idea of your fat loss and your health. However, in order to see these improvements in the mirror, you need to follow a diet, yeah? What one? Myth 24 is that there's a best diet out there. Every diet or hack tends to claim to be the best way to lose weight. To back these claims up, they have amazing feedback from actual followers. Here's the thing, the feedback might be true, all of it. In other words, every diet has people that have done amazing on it. You see, every diet will work for some people. However, there's no perfect diet. What these diet advertisements don't tell you about is all the people who have failed. That's because not everyone does well on every diet. So there's no perfect diet, but there might be a perfect diet for you. In fact, maybe you don't even need a diet. Maybe you just need to cut out certain foods. You see, there's 2 things that dictate a diet's success. The first is that it puts you in a caloric deficit. For myth 25, we're going to tell you the second one. The most important variable of a diet that will dictate your success isn't what foods it cuts out or what time frame you eat, but adherence. Every diet claims to use different mechanisms to promote fat loss. Perhaps it's increasing fat metabolism for fuel. Maybe it gives you flexibility in what foods you can eat so you don't lose interest. In reality, any of these could work for you. It's your job to find out what makes the most sense to you. What type of diet or style of eating fits your needs and lifestyle? You'll know if it works if you're able to adhere for a long period. Ideally, you'll find a way of eating that doesn't feel like a diet. This is what'll cause meaningful weight loss, long-term adherence. Speaking of diets, there is one tactic that we have a problem with. Myth 26 is the use of cheat days. Using cheat days is a sure way to sabotage your progress and might even completely derail your diet. Remember, you should only be in a 500-calorie deficit daily, meaning in 6 days, you'll have a total of a 3,000-calorie deficit. If you give yourself the freedom to eat what you want for an entire day, you can easily get rid of your entire deficit. For example, people are often seen eating an entire Domino's pizza, which could have 1,800 to 2,500 calories. At the very least, it'll slow down your weight loss significantly. Still, we believe this style of eating makes you associate your normal diet foods as being boring. Imagine believing you're being punished all week and your only bit of happiness comes from looking forward to the weekend so you can eat the greasiest bacon cheeseburger and pizza. Instead, you should have put more effort into finding healthy recipes for delicious foods so you don't feel like you need to have a cheat day. Up until now, we've been dealing a lot with myths that have a bit of nuance in them. For myth 27, let's get back to a myth that's just 100% wrong: training by body types. We're not sure when the body type training started or why, but it needs to go. Body types is simply referring to what are known as somatotypes. Somatotypes were identified in the 1940s by a sociologist named William H. Sheldon. What does a sociologist have to do with weight loss? Well, nothing. He was originally testing a theory that said physical characteristics were attached to personality. For example, he theorized that endomorphs, short and heavier weight, tended to be more jovial and sweet. On the other hand, ectomorphs, tall and skinny individuals, are intelligent, shy, and creative, while mesomorphs, individuals with athletic builds, are confident and aggressive. And if you're thinking that has nothing to do with weight loss, you are correct. Everyone loses the same and everyone gains weight the same. Don't fall for these special programs. The only thing special about them is their high price. Myth 28 is another downright lie. Carbs make you fat. While we're at it, let's include myth 29. Fat will make you fat. If you're old enough to remember growing up in the 80s and early 90s, you remember that fat was demonized and was the sole reason for weight gain in the USA. However, a shift started around the 2000s and was in full swing by 2010. Now, carbs were the enemy. Doesn't take a genius to realize these both can't be right. So which one is right? Neither. Both are wrong. No single nutrient is the sole reason you're gaining weight. You gain weight due to eating excessive calories. In reality, this is due to the sheer amount of added sugar in our diet and processed foods. These foods are simply extra high in calories and palatability, yet have low or no nutritional value. Unhealthy food is what makes us fat. This is why you should focus on whole foods that are full of quality carbs and fat, and you're good to go. We've made it to number 30. Diet soda is good for you. Again, this belief comes from people judging food solely based on the amount of calories in it. As diet soda has no calories, it must be good, right? Nope. Soda has artificial sweeteners that can cause similar responses in insulin and is still associated with metabolic syndrome and obesity. How does it increase obesity? Apart from confusing your insulin release, studies show it can trigger dopamine and actually increase appetite. To be fair, there are also studies that show it might help with weight loss. However, this is hardly true for 100% of people, so it's not a magic bullet. Besides, there are far too many other issues to make it your primary source of hydration if you're losing weight. Just stick to water. But that's not the only diet food to be aware of. Myth 31 is that reduced-calorie foods are good for you. In reality, almost any fat-free or reduced-fat food has issues. Again, these claims are feeding off fear of fat. As we mentioned in myth 29, some fats are actually good for you. Unfortunately, these good natural fats are what's usually taken out of food. At that same time, these fats are usually just replaced with carbs, generally simple sugars as a means to add taste. They're just swapping around calories. Again, stick to whole foods and this won't be an issue. Speaking of whole foods, your diet shouldn't restrict any of them. Myth 32 is that keto, carnivore, or any other restrictive diet is good for weight loss. There's a ton of nuance in this one, but the main issue is demonizing an entire food group as a whole. Again, in modern times, it's generally carbs. However, even veganism, which marks off all animal products, is not going to be your key to weight loss. Well, it might be, if it fits your lifestyle, but it's not a miracle diet for every person. If it works for you, then great, but if you can't adhere to it, it's worthless. So again, this doesn't mean these can't work, we're just saying there's nothing inherently magical about them. Speaking of veganism, myth 33 is a trick they use when comparing a traditional diet against veganism. When a vegan diet is promoted, they often compare it to a traditional diet to prove its superiority. When the traditional diet is shown, it's usually a mixture of soda, pizza, hamburgers, and of course veganism is better than that. However, a nutritionist writing a meal plan for an omnivore isn't going to use those foods because no one thinks they're healthy. A healthy omnivore diet would be full of fish, lean meats, complex carbs, nuts, legumes, fruit, vegetables, etc. Plus, a whole lot of what's on pizza and burgers are vegan anyway. This one just rubs us the wrong way as it's dishonest. If you want to try a vegan diet, then that's great. Just don't fall for misleading comparisons. Another common belief seen in the world of weight loss is that you can target your weight loss in a specific area. Myth 34 is that you can perform spot reduction. Now, this one does have a bit of nuance. Recently, some studies have shown this might actually be possible through both medical interventions and your training. However, research is far from conclusive, and there are too many unknowns to allow someone to prescribe a solid training program. Further, the entire idea is to set someone up for failure. What if they try and they don't lose weight in that spot that's desired? They'll probably get discouraged. Any excess fat will hurt your physique and your health, so just concentrate on the total body fat, or else you might get involved with suboptimal training. Let's address another myth with training. Myth 35 is that you can train away a bad diet. Now, of course, training is going to help you burn calories. However, this means nothing if you don't have your diet under control. Think about this. Who has ever gained weight because they didn't train enough? No one. Everyone throughout history has always gained weight because they ate too much. Sure, being involved in regular training will increase the amount of calories you eat. However, you can definitely eat more if your diet is left unchecked. Stop putting so much emphasis on your fat-burning workouts and pay more attention to your daily nutrition. Then you'll start seeing real results. Let's tackle another myth that deals with high expectations. Myth 36 is that weight loss happens immediately. Of course, sometimes it does, but other times it doesn't. Some people may not have measurable results for 2 weeks. This can be due to a plethora of reasons. Perhaps you're not fit enough and your training isn't as intense as it could be. Maybe you're eating hidden calories somewhere and underestimating the amount you're consuming. It could be anything. The point is, don't expect to see significant results right away. Give yourself at least a month before reaching any assessments, and that's the bare minimum. Myth 37 is a good one as we're actually busting a busted myth, that is that you can lose weight while drinking alcohol. Generally, the claim is as long as you watch your calories, having a spirit or a low-calorie beer is okay. While this may technically be right, it's not reality. By reality, we mean that people can easily get carried away when drinking. In fact, that's the joke. A crazy night always starts with, "I'll just have a couple." At the same time, alcohol actually triggers your AGRP neurons, which are your starvation neurons. In other words, they trigger stronger hunger. This is why you might get cravings even having just a couple of drinks, even if you just ate. It's not good when you're trying to lose weight. Also, we do know for sure it's definitely not going to help you lose weight. That means the best option is to stay away. Plus, alcohol is going to waste money, and since eating healthy is so expensive, you need to save your money. Or is it? Myth 38 is that eating healthy is expensive. Maybe this was true a couple decades ago, but not anymore. Perhaps you won't be able to eat sirloin and salmon every meal, but lean beef, chicken, and pork can be bought for less than $6 a pound. Apples are about $2 a pound, while bananas are just 75 cents a pound. Figure that one Snickers is $1.39, and a meal deal at McDonald's can easily cost $6. Now, of course, we understand there are some instances where buying the healthier version of a product may be more expensive, such as no added sugar varieties, but this definitely isn't true across the board. And yes, organic will be more expensive than non-organic, but non-organic beef is better than McDonald's, and one of our favorite snacks is banana or apple and peanut butter. There's actually a website that details cheap recipes. Therefore, don't buy into this, pun intended, and throw away your entire diet. The good thing is at least you're eating. Myth 39 is that fasting is an effective way to lose weight. Again, this one is full of nuance. Fasting can be an effective method for some people to lose weight. However, the primary working mechanism comes down to you not eating as many calories. In other words, there's nothing about fasting that speeds up fat loss or makes you lose more fat, assuming you're eating the same amount of calories. In terms of weight loss, it helps some people control their total caloric intake. At the same time, some people will wait until they eat and then chow down on thousands of calories thinking it's okay, they fasted. For fasting to work, you still must fix your diet. For the big 4-0, we're going to fix a huge fault. Now, this isn't a myth per se, rather it's a damaging behavior that many exhibit while losing weight. We're talking about the need to obsess over every little detail of your workout and nutrition. Of course, it's great to be aware. In fact, you need to be aware. However, many people new to their weight loss journey can begin to obsess and overanalyze everything they do. For example, worrying what exercise burns more calories, or trying to hit their calories perfectly. Oh no, yesterday I burned 400 calories in class, but today I only burned 370. These 30 calories are all that's required to get some people discouraged. Remember that weight loss is the sum total of months and months of work. Stressing over every detail every day is a surefire way to fail. Be aware throughout the day, but understand your journey will not be perfect. Like we said earlier in the video, it's not linear, and obsessing over everything won't make it so. One of the things people obsess about is definitely going to be food. Therefore, they will often choose nutrition bars or granola bars for a healthy alternative to other snacks. Myth 41 is believing a food is healthy just because the package says so. While some nutrition bars are actually nutritious, most of your mainstream bars have similar ingredients and nutritional value to typical candy bars. The thing is, as long as we can convince ourselves something is healthy, it's good to go in our mind. For example, we sometimes will jokingly eat a Snickers and say it's a healthier choice because it has peanuts. The point is, there are a ton of examples of a food that's marketed as healthy, but after you take a closer look, you'll see it's not so. To determine if a food is healthy, you must check the actual ingredient list as well as the nutritional values. Speaking of checking the nutritional value instead of listening to packaging, Myth 42 will deal with one of the most common lies: high-protein food. How is that a myth? Well, foods advertised as high-protein are rarely actually high-protein. The term high-protein is thrown around everywhere. We've even seen peanut butter claimed to be high-protein. Now, we love peanut butter. However, unless it's a special brand that adds protein, it is not high protein. Unfortunately, there's no clear definition for what a high-protein food is or what percent of calories should come from protein. However, a good guess would be a minimum of 20 grams of protein for every 200 calories, or at least every serving has 20 grams. That puts it at 40% protein, which is still relatively low compared to chicken breast, which is 80% protein. 40% foods include such things as salmon or sirloin steak. To be clear, food doesn't have to be high protein to be healthy, and its protein content doesn't define its value. They're just labeling high protein as a sales tactic. Speaking of quote high-protein foods that aren't necessarily high protein, yet you should still be eating, eggs. Myth number 43 is people telling you to stay away from eggs. Where this myth stems from is specifically the yolk of the egg, as it's full of cholesterol. There's been a long-standing myth that cholesterol is bad for you and you should limit it as much as possible. This is a heavily nuanced subject, but it's basically summed up as some cholesterol is actually really good for you. Regardless, we now know the myth of eating a few eggs a week is way exaggerated. In fact, we already talked about how adding eggs to your breakfast can improve weight loss. In addition, opting out of eating yolk for only the whites can actually cause a decrease in your testosterone levels. Why? Because testosterone is cholesterol-based. Now let's hit another exercise-related myth. Myth 44 is that you should be exhausted after every workout. Thanks to the whole no pain, no gain mindset, we've all been led to believe that every workout needs to be brutal and you should be rolling around in a puddle of sweat every time you train. While this is fine once in a while, it doesn't need to be done every time. In fact, you shouldn't train this way every time. Your body is not equipped for such high intensity all the time. If you do, it could lead to either fatigue or injury. Caloric-wise, it's also not needed. For one, if you're overweight, you likely don't have the stamina to maintain high intensity for too long. So while you might get tired and be sweating profusely, the total amount of work is going to be pretty low. However, if you take the intensity down, you can train significantly longer, which will lead to a greater caloric burn. In fact, one of the best things you can do is put a treadmill on an incline and walk briskly for an hour. Another thing you don't need to burn fat? Myth 45 is that any crazy contraption will help you lose weight. After being on Earth for a few decades, we've seen a lot of products sold to melt fat. Fat belts, fat massagers, and heating creams, just to name a few. None of these work to any meaningful degree. There are a few products out there that may have some science to back them up, but they're few and far between. Again, these are designed to prey on people's desire of having an easy fix to weight loss. Don't buy into them, literally. Our next myth is also similar to myth 45. Myth 46 is the use of sweatsuits for fat loss. We already talked about how sweating doesn't equate to fat loss, but we want to double down on sweatsuits, mainly because they're dangerous. Sweatsuits are clothing that are specifically made to induce sweating. A free version is simply using trash bags. Now, these do hold a purpose which is beyond the scope of this video, however, it is not to lose meaningful weight. If you use one, you'll likely lose a significant amount of weight in a short amount of time. However, this is merely water weight, as you literally sweated it all out. As we talked before, sweating has very little to do with caloric burn. You will gain all this weight back the instant you finish and hydrate. So how do we lose weight? Myth 47 would say you need to go on a diet. You don't. We need to clarify what we mean. When we say go on a diet, we're talking about Atkins or keto or paleo, something of that nature. In reality, you just need to clean up what you're eating. The majority of people can simply follow 2 rules and see awesome results. Cut out foods with added sugar and limit processed foods. That's it. Those 2 rules are sufficient for the majority of people. This basically means you need to concentrate on eating whole foods, and these are foods that should remain similar to how they're found in the wild. Often people are so used to eating processed foods that are very high in calories compared to whole foods. Once they start eating whole foods, they can find they eat a much larger quantity and fill up fast, which ultimately results in weight loss. Myth 48 is that if it runs in the family, there's nothing you can do about it. While genetics can play a role in determining someone's predisposition to certain body types and metabolic rates, it's crucial to recognize that lifestyle factors, including diet and exercise, significantly impact weight. The next one is a big one, and it's more of a lie we tell ourselves. Myth 49 is that you're only eating 1,200 calories but still gaining weight. This is probably the most common claim that trainers hear from a client whose weight loss isn't going as planned. The client keeps gaining weight even though they're only eating 1,200 calories. A trainer wants to listen and seem like they understand. In reality, they want to tell you, stop lying. It's harsh, but it's true. There are a few instances where someone's body won't respond to basic physiology, but again, these are the very small exceptions to the rule. However, people may not know they're lying, which we guess doesn't actually make it a lie, but you get the point. Rather, they severely underestimate how much they eat. Emphasis on severely. A study from back in 1992 found that obese patients on average underreport calories by 47% and overestimate activity by 51%. What this means is that if you think you're eating 1,200 calories, you're probably eating around 1,800. If you think you're burning 500 calories, you're probably only burning around 330. Further, many reported that they think they had medical issues such as thyroid issues, and even some took medication. Other studies have been done as well with similar results. We're not saying this to be harsh. Rather, we want you to succeed. The first part of being successful is being totally honest with where you stand. If you think you're eating 1,200 calories but are really eating 2,000, you need to know and learn how to calculate. Myth number 50. Weight loss is hard. You're probably thinking, of course it's hard. How do you explain everyone trying? Understood. But losing weight really isn't hard. We should explain the mechanics of dieting are actually very simple. You need to start eating healthier and start moving more. Yes, there's some nuance in there, but for the majority of people, that's what needs to happen. What's hard is falling to temptation, not sticking to your plan and breaking bad habits. Have you ever seen this before? Guys with a literal timer on their watch set to go off every few hours to remind them to eat their protein? They do this to ensure that they never see the slightest little dip in muscle protein synthesis throughout the day. But with a big emphasis on the day part, things change at night since there is this huge 8+ hour block of time that's been ignored in terms of protein intake. That is, until now. Recently, researchers have looked into this overlooked time frame and have made some pretty interesting discoveries, and now we have the answer to how you could actually grow more while you sleep with pre-sleep protein. Our muscle mass is in a perpetual state of tug-of-war between 2 processes that dictate if we gain or lose muscle mass: muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, and muscle protein breakdown. Muscle protein synthesis, or MPS, is the technical term for the process of building new muscle. While usually associated with building new muscle, it's always occurring to facilitate our protein turnover rate. Just like every other cell in the body, our muscle cells must renew themselves to stay healthy. This is one of the reasons why everyone needs to consume protein regardless of whether you work out 6 days a week or just watch Netflix every day. When we consume protein, it's digested and broken down into its individual amino acids. These amino acids have many jobs, but the most important is triggering MPS, causing a transitory spike. Amino acids are brought in to rebuild muscle, and voila, you have more muscles. Resistance training will also increase the rate of MPS by way of mechanical stress and the accumulation of metabolites. It's for this reason it's suggested to consume a post-workout meal full of protein and amino acids, as the body is in a more favorable condition for muscle growth. But whether it's from training or the consumption of protein, MPS is spiked, creating an anabolic environment that favors the growth of muscle. However, when our MPS levels drop, we are at a risk of losing muscle, especially if muscle protein breakdown increases. It's this struggle that's made the topic of food timing so popular, with the goal to maximize the amount of time our bodies have positive levels of MPS. In a nutshell, food timing refers to the practice of consuming your nutrition at specific times to enhance its beneficial effects. It can include numerous elements such as carb loading, but for this video we're only concerned with the timing of our protein ingestion. As mentioned, when you consume a protein-rich meal or a protein supplement, it's broken down and your bloodstream is flooded with amino acids, which creates a transitory spike. Depending on the protein source and the ingestion with other macronutrients, an MPS spike rises quickly and then gradually returns to baseline in 3 to 5 hours. As our goal is to have a consistent rise in MPS, we risk a drop by waiting too long between our feedings. Therefore, instead of eating all of our protein in one sitting, the most popular strategy of consuming protein is to spread it out equally throughout the day. The objective is to provide an overlap of the spikes from the individual protein feedings. While there's no consensus, this is the general strategy suggested by most sports researchers and institutions, such as the International Society of Sports Nutrition. Their stand on protein suggests the consumption of at least 20 to 25 grams of protein, around 0.25 grams per kilogram per meal with each main meal, with no more than 3 to 4 hours between meals. This would equal around 4 to 6 servings per day. For example, if you need to eat 150 grams of protein, you might eat 5 servings of 30 grams of protein spaced out every 3 hours. This allows you to generate a steady spike in MPS throughout the day. But what about the night? That's where the issue of sleep comes into play. If we're talking about a healthy individual who is active, they'll probably eat their last meal a couple of hours before sleep and then eat breakfast maybe 30 minutes after they wake up. Given that you should sleep for 8 hours, that's 10.5 hours you're not supplying your body any amino acids. Theoretically then, if eating every 3 to 4 hours maximizes MPS throughout the day, this would mean you're going 4 to 6 hours with low levels of MPS. Could this period of time that's been neglected so long actually contain a muscle hack? Sports researchers decided that someone should look into this vast amount of time that no one's been utilizing, and in 2012, one of the first studies on overnight protein consumption was conducted. 16 healthy men performed a resistance training session in the evening at 8 p.m. and were given a post-exercise meal of 20 grams of protein and 60 grams of carbs. After this, the 16 men were divided into 2 groups, one that drank a placebo 30 minutes before bed and one that drank 40 grams of casein protein. Their blood levels were sampled throughout the entirety of their sleep, which totaled 7.5 hours. What they found was that the protein group had elevated levels of amino acids circulating throughout the night. In addition, they had better whole-body protein synthesis and a greater net total of protein. This study did not look at any performance factors such as recovery or muscle hypertrophy, but it was the first study to show that overnight protein can be effectively digested and absorbed, resulting in greater bioavailability of amino acids, increased muscle protein synthesis, and greater net protein. A similar study was done in 2018 by the same group, this time with 36 healthy young men eating 30 grams of casein. Again, amino acids were found in greater concentration throughout the night. However, muscle protein synthesis wasn't increased to the same extent, suggesting that perhaps larger amounts like 40 grams used in the previous study were needed. Nevertheless, the results were still promising. Right now, you might be thinking, awesome, MPS is great, but what about actual muscle gains or recovery? That's a fair question, and pre-sleep protein delivers again. What may be the first study to actually demonstrate benefits to body composition and performance was conducted in 2015, and differing from the other studies that were short-term, this one was carried out for 3 months. In it, 44 young men were all placed on a resistance training program for 12 weeks. Every variable was the same except for one group that consumed a protein supplement that consisted of 27.5 grams of protein and 50 grams of carbohydrate immediately before sleep, and the other just a placebo. After 3 months of resistance training, both groups saw significant gains in strength, muscle mass, and an increase in muscle fiber size. However, the pre-sleep protein group saw the increases in composition and strength we're looking for. The cross-section area of the quadriceps of the placebo group saw an increase of 6%, while the protein group saw an increase of 10%. In addition, the protein group also saw a significant increase in type 2 muscle fibers. Type 2 muscle fibers are those responsible for generating high amounts of force for a short amount of time, as seen in weightlifting and sprints. Strength-wise, the protein group experienced greater results in strength across a multitude of exercises, including leg press, row, and overhead shoulder press. Yet another study from 2021 found that pre-sleep protein resulted in significantly greater perceived recovery compared to that of a placebo after resistance training. Many of the variables were similar to the study we just looked at. They trained in the evening and had a protein supplement post-exercise, then had a serving of protein or placebo 30 minutes before sleep. Where this study is a bit unique is that it used both a casein supplement, a blended casein whey supplement, and a placebo. However, the blend used a 2-to-1 ratio of casein to whey. In the morning, both pre-sleep protein groups produced significantly better results in perceived soreness when compared to the placebo. And when compared to one another, the casein group slightly outperformed the blended group. Perceived recovery is definitely cool as no one likes pain, but can pre-sleep protein actually go past just how it makes us feel and actually improve performance? Yes, it can. While not lifting weights, professional soccer players see a large amount of muscle damage from their matches. In fact, it can be so intense they actually experience drops in performance for several days after a match. During this time, players often report losses in strength, power, and sprint performance, while also experiencing muscle soreness and discomfort. In 2018, a group of researchers decided to see if pre-sleep protein could possibly offer any benefits to those athletes. So 10 young soccer players were selected for a case study on 2 separate nights after matches. After playing an evening match, half of them consumed a protein supplement containing 40 grams of casein protein just before sleep, while the others acted as a control group. Upon waking, they were tested on several different outcomes to determine if their pre-sleep supplement could lead to greater performance. To figure out if there was a performance gain, a counter-movement jump height was one of the variables tested, which is a vertical jump test for height. An athlete will quickly drop to a self-selected depth and then jump as high as possible. Results show that the placebo group demonstrated a moderate deficit, while the protein group only demonstrated a small deficit. In terms of reactive strength, the placebo group was greatly affected until 60 hours post-exercise. The protein group only saw some trivial changes from the start. Both groups experienced muscle soreness, but the protein group reported much less at just the 12-hour mark. Now here's where it gets really interesting. In the soccer study, both groups consumed a post-exercise meal, and since in this case the exercise was an evening soccer match, they both had a nighttime feeding. So, shouldn't the control group have seen the benefits of nighttime protein? The difference was that the test group consumed their additional protein supplement 30 minutes before sleep. This suggests eating your protein a few hours before bed isn't enough. Instead, it seems that pre-sleep consumption less than 30 minutes before sleep is the key to providing excessively greater benefits throughout the night. So far, we've seen that pre-sleep protein can benefit both strength and team sport athletes. Now let's take a look at its effects on endurance athletes. In 2023, 36 healthy young men performed an hour of endurance exercises from 7:45 p.m. to 8:45 p.m. In addition, they ate an earlier dinner plus a post-exercise meal. They then waited until 30 minutes before sleep at 11:30 p.m. when they consumed one of 3 different supplements: 45 grams of casein, 45 grams of whey, or a placebo. They then went to bed as normal. In addition to the larger servings of protein, this study had its own unique twist. It specifically tested both mitochondrial and myofibrillar protein synthesis. Both of these involve synthesizing proteins, however they differ in exact function. Myofibrillar proteins are actual contractile components involved in strength. This includes myosin, actin, tropomyosin, and troponin. On the other hand, mitochondrial proteins are responsible for creating energy. The differences between them are best explained by the study itself, which says the synthesis of myofibrillar proteins is primarily responsible for changes in skeletal muscle mass following resistance training, while mitochondrial proteins are primarily synthesized in response to endurance-type training. With that in mind, the study found that both the whey and casein protein significantly increase the synthesis of both proteins. That's to say, pre-sleep protein can support the recovery from both strength and endurance-related events. This study also found no difference in the magnitude of protein synthesis in the casein compared to whey. Now, we do need to note that not every study shows positive results, such as one from 2022. In it, resistance-trained men performed a resistance training workout and then consumed either protein supplements or a placebo drink before sleep. The next day, they conducted another training session, but in this case, the pre-sleep group saw no differences in training performance when compared to the placebo group. Now, one possibility for this might have to do with the measurement. This study used 1-rep max testing for a bench press and squats to measure performance, which is basically where you lift as much weight as you can for 1 rep. By using 1-rep max testing, while some muscle damage may have occurred, it may not have been enough to cause an actual improvement upon these maximal heavy barbell movements, at least in a single session. In fact, a study from 2017 also measured the effect of pre-sleep protein on strength performance and found it did improve. However, this study tested repetitions to failure, counter-movement jump, and maximal voluntary contraction. This is in addition to the study we went over earlier that showed long-term use, 12 weeks of pre-sleep protein improved both recovery and muscle size. It would make sense that this long-term would be necessary to see measurable differences in larger exercises. The point we want to make clear is that there is still a lot to learn about pre-sleep protein ingestion. But still, in general, studies on pre-sleep protein ingestion does lean toward it being beneficial. As this meta-analysis summarizes, based on current evidence, the consumption of 20 to 40 grams of casein approximately 30 minutes before sleep improves protein synthetic response during an overnight recovery period in healthy young adult men, with possible positive effects on muscle mass and strength following prolonged resistance exercise. And at this point, we want to note that benefits seem to apply more to younger trainees as opposed to the older population. But we're not done yet. Chances are you might be thinking, won't eating at night make me fat? In short, no. And looking at the effect that nighttime eating has on the body is an entire video of its own. But first, you need to keep in mind that this extra protein at night is not an entire meal, it's a snack. As protein has 4 calories per gram, a 40-gram supplement will have 160 calories from protein. There's always more than just pure protein, so depending on the quality, it should still usually be under 200 calories. And new studies have found that low-calorie snacks, especially when they are protein-dense, will not have adverse effects in active populations. Concerning nighttime snacking, this 2015 study even hypothesized this about high-protein snacks. It's plausible to hypothesize that acute enhancements in overnight muscle protein synthesis and next morning resting metabolism may further aid in the maintenance and/or improvement in body composition. Well, newer studies have provided more evidence for this statement. For example, a 2022 study found that pre-sleep protein actually increased sleep energy expenditure and next-day fullness. And this result seems to be similar to most other studies on pre-sleep protein. Now, to be clear, we're not saying this is going to melt the fat off you. In the grand scheme of things, the benefit will likely be quite small. Rather, the main point is it's not going to contribute to overeating, damaged metabolisms, or anything like that. So any fear that you have from scaremongering advice in the past, like don't eat dinner after 6 or you'll get fat, can be put to rest. It's simply not a real concern. You probably noticed that a lot of these studies are using something called casein protein. So what the heck is it? And why can't you just drink your regular old whey protein? Well, let's look at one of the reasons we usually take whey protein powder after a workout. Or more specifically, why do we take hydrolyzed whey protein powder? Whey protein is what's known as a fast protein. What this essentially means is that your body is able to break it down into amino acids faster. This allows it to be more easily absorbed and utilized. What this does is cause a very high spike in muscle protein synthesis. However, it doesn't last as long. When you buy things like hydrolyzed whey protein powder, it means the protein's been broken down even further through extra processing. As a result, the effect is magnified, an even higher spike for a shorter duration. While this is good for post-workout, a big short spike is not what we want while sleeping. For one, your body's resting, so there's no need for an excessively high MPS spike. In addition, you're sleeping for 8 hours and are better off with a smaller rise that lasts longer. And this is what casein does. Like whey, casein also comes from dairy. When milk is being processed, it's separated into a watery substance, which is whey, and white curds, which is casein. Both are high-quality proteins, meaning they have an optimal amino acid profile. However, unlike whey, casein is slow digesting. Due to its structure, casein is broken down significantly slower than whey, providing a smaller rise for longer. exactly what we're looking for. This was shown clearly in an early study from 1997 with an elementary study design. Feed participants either casein or whey and then take blood samples with various timestamps. It concludes, whey protein induced a dramatic but short increase of plasma amino acids. Casein protein induced a prolonged plateau of moderate hyperaminoacidemia, probably because of a slow gastric emptying. It also noted that casein had slower oxidation and higher leucine content at the 7-hour mark. This is critical as leucine is the primary amino acid in terms of muscle protein synthesis. It quite literally pulls the trigger to activate it. So what does this all mean to you? Well, a couple of things. At the very least, consuming a pre-sleep casein protein drink might be an efficient way to ensure that you get your total protein intake. Some people may have an issue getting in high amounts of protein, so this acts as one extra feeding. As we discussed, this isn't going to cause any unwanted fat gain, assuming it is high quality and doesn't contain a lot of fillers that lead to a surplus of calories. There are sufficient studies to show that taking a casein protein supplement before sleep has a good chance of increasing recovery and reducing muscle soreness. And while studies aren't as abundant, there's also a chance it could actually increase the amount of muscle growth you see. Considering all that, it seems like it's definitely worth adding to your nutrition regime. All you need to do is take 30 to 40 grams of a casein supplement 30 minutes before bed. It's up to you if you choose to use milk or water to mix it with, so see what fits your calorie needs. One thing to remember is that to obtain the best results, long-term adherence seems to be of a benefit. This should become part of your nighttime routine, not just something done once in a while. Another factor to keep in mind about casein is it may also serve as a more effective general protein source. For example, if you're making a breakfast smoothie to start the day, or if you're just having a healthy snack. During these times of non-training, the same rationale that supports casein for pre-sleep protein would apply here. Primarily, you don't need the ultra-fast supply of amino acids from whey under normal conditions, so a slower release casein might provide some benefits. At that same time, due to the consistency of casein, many people find it to be significantly more filling. Compared to whey, it's usually significantly thicker and more filling, making it a great choice to control your appetite. If that sounds interesting, you might want to try it and see for yourself. And don't worry, there's definitely still room for whey as your optimal post-workout protein source. Pre-sleep protein could possibly be the easiest hack there is to improve muscle recovery and muscle growth. And after reviewing all the studies, it seems as if there's a greater chance of seeing benefits than not. Luckily, working it into your routine cannot be simpler. Just drink a protein shake right before bed, and in return, you could unlock gains that were once neglected while you slept.